Chapter 1016. The immortal light emitted by the 9 talismans was as clear as water, and the extremely pure immortal energy of the Tao League was filled with an extreme repulsive force. Any kind of energy would be mercilessly wiped out by this immortal energy, and even immortal energy cultivated from the same scriptures of Tao League would trigger the talisman's warning. Wuxia withdrew all his aura, and carefully transformed all his magic power into the same fluctuation as the immortal energy of the extreme attribute emitted by the talismans. Like a drop of water, he passed through a thick water curtain, and entered Wanling Palace without a sound. Although the 9 talismans were made by the Tao Patriarchs, they were, after all, made by the Tao Patriarchs, and they were not personally overseen by the Tao Patriarchs. Therefore it was not difficult for him to do so. The restrictive spells around Wanling Palace were still mostly intact. Except for the generals who led the attack on Diyu, all the elite forces of the Ling dynasty were stationed here. The Ling dynasty itself did not have any experts above the realm of Tao breaking, only a few hundred generals of Hongmengpanga heaven, and about 300 supreme oracles. But their cultivation techniques had a fatal flaw. The celestial court did not pass down all their cultivation techniques. Apart from the Ling dynasty's own strength, the celestial court had also stationed more than 3,000 celestial lords in Wanling City. These celestial lords were only gold immortals or even heaven immortals, but when they summoned their natal star power, they were at least as strong as the realm of primordial. As for the other immortals who came to seek refuge, including the sect masters and grandmasters of the immortal sects in outer heavenly realms, only a few of them had reached the realm of primordial. The Tao-breaking experts of Tao League were all stationed in the Daoyu Ocean, racking their brains to figure out how to take back the 33 heavens. With thousands of celestial lords stationed in Wanling City, theoretically, they should be able to cope with Diyu's attack. But now that the Daoyu Ocean's passage to the outside world was cut off, Wanling City had to rely on this little force to cope with the fiend tribulation. As soon as Wuxia sneaked into Wanling Palace, his legs gave way, and the whole city shook. At the foot of the mountain, a statue of the Azure Dragon was smashed to pieces by the tentacles of dozens of demons that looked like giant jellyfish. The statue was destroyed, and a ball of greenwood lightning with a diameter of 10 miles exploded, blowing these fiend gods into pieces. However, a passageway leading to the upper level of Myriad Spirit City had already been blasted open. Countless demon gods rushed up through the open passageway. Behind the green dragon statue, tens of thousands of Ling dynasty soldiers lined up in a neat phalanx formation, shouting the slogan of "Fight to the death" as they marched forward. They were clad in heavy armor and wielded heavy shields and spears. They were like a city wall that sealed the passage that had been blasted open. But they had neglected the most important thing. They didn't have a single priest protecting them. For countless years in outer heavenly realms, the people of the Ling dynasty had developed an arrogant and overbearing temper. The soldiers who fought against Diyu at the front line were fine. They had paid the price of blood to learn the various experiences that should be available on the battlefield. But in Myriad Spirit City, the noble oracles stood high above the masses. They lived in the upper district of the city, which was closest to Myriad Spirit's palace, and there were few oracles stationed near the foot of the mountain. A demon god, who had the body of a 4-winged goshawk and the upper body of a beautiful woman, widened her eyes, took a deep breath, and suddenly let out a soul-tearing shriek. Suddenly, the bodies of tens of thousands of Ling dynasty soldiers trembled, and streams of colorful light burst out of their 7 orifices. It was the sound of their torn souls being sucked out of their bodies by an evil fiend power, and plunging into the demon god's body. The demon god laughed complacently. With a single shriek, she tore the souls of tens of thousands of soldiers apart. She enjoyed the delicious tonic very much. Behind her, the demon gods roared in exasperation. They rushed towards the corpses of the Ling dynasty soldiers who had lost their souls, grabbed them, and stuffed them into their mouths without bothering to take off their armors. Blood splattered, and a terrible chewing sound rang out into the distance. Not far away, a statue of a white tiger slowly turned around, opened its huge mouth that was emitting a thick white mist, and shot out a beam of white light that looked like a waterfall. The beam, which was about 1,000 feet in diameter, hit the group of fiend gods who were blocking the entrance. The powerful metal energy transformed into countless sword beams that flew in all directions, shredding the bodies of hundreds of fiend gods. The demon gods at the back did not care about the death of their companions at the front, and continued to charge forward like a tide. 10 miles above them, a vermilion bird statue also turned around and faced them. Countless tiny streams of red light danced from the vermilion bird's feathers and gathered in its beak. Suddenly, a clear bird cry resounded through the sky, and a great wave of red flames came rolling over. Over 1,000 fiend gods near the tunnel were burned to ashes, and even the ground near the tunnel was scorched red and softened. As the demon gods continued to charge, another loud rumble came from afar. A statue of a black tortoise was destroyed, and a black wave rolled out of it and instantly drowned the ground 100 miles in circumference. The black wave turned into blue ice and sealed everything. Tens of thousands of demon gods were frozen stiff in the ice, and the life force in their bodies had been instantly wiped out by the cold. Tens of thousands of divine beast statues kept killing countless demon gods with the energies of 5 elements, and every attack they made the city of Wanling tremble. If any of the statues were destroyed, the recoil from the underground energy veins would make the city tremble violently, as if it was about to sink into the ground. The demon gods kept charging into the city, and no matter what price they had to pay, no matter how many were killed or wounded, they kept pushing forward. One divine beast statue after another was destroyed, and countless Ling Dynasty soldiers were killed by the demon gods' soul-stealing divine abilities and mystic arts. An angry scolding came from the Wanling Palace, as Zhang Tingyan was stomping his feet and cursing the oracles of the Ling Dynasty. It was only then that the mighty supreme oracles of the Ling Dynasty suddenly came to their senses. They hurriedly brought countless disciples to reinforce the Ling Dynasty soldiers who were massacred by the demon gods' soul-stealing mystic arts. Countless bone talismans fell down, and the soldiers of the Ling Dynasty began to glow with the unique light of various restrictive spells. Under the protection of the defensive spells, they gradually stabilized their footing and began to fight fiercely against the ferocious demon gods. Driven by some mystic arts, the soldiers of the Ling Dynasty, who had become valiant and fearless of death, fought the demon gods with great vigor. Relying on the powerful restrictive spells of flight unleashed by the 9 talismans, these soldiers managed to fend off the attack of the demon gods in the streets, alleys, and all the traffic arteries of the city of Wanling. But even though the demon gods had suffered a great loss, the number of demon gods outside the city was still endless, with no end in sight. Their numbers did not seem to be decreasing at all. On the contrary, the living forces in the city were constantly being depleted. Cries and howls could be heard everywhere. The mansions of the servants in the city with low cultivation bases were broken through by the demon gods, and their masters fled to the higher grounds of the city under the protection of some mighty guards, leaving these servants to be devoured by the demon gods in all kinds of ways. Some demon gods liked bone marrow, some liked muscle, some liked blood, and some liked brains. As long as they fell into their hands, these servants would not be left with a single hair, because some demon gods liked to make clothes out of human hair. Hiding in the Wanling Palace, Wuxia looked coldly at the miserable scene down below. His divine will locked onto the figures of some important figures in the palace, thinking about what he should do next. Originally, Wuxia wanted the war between Diyu, the Ling Dynasty, and the Shizo Dynasty to last forever. It would be best if it could last for 1 or 2 eons. He needed time to strengthen his forces, to have more Dao-breaking experts around him, or to train a few Dao-fusing experts. Otherwise, he would not have enough power to speak in Pangu world. However, the little trick of the 7th Patriarch of the Buddhist League had suddenly broken the balance of the war, pushing the Ling Dynasty to the brink of destruction. If the Celestial Court could not send reinforcements in time to kill these demon gods, once the Ling Dynasty was destroyed, Diyu would not be any better off. With these demon gods as the vanguard, the Shizo Dynasty might be able to replace Diyu, and by then all the pressure would fall on the East Sea. These 7 old fellows are ruthless enough to hit the vitals directly. Those Daozu can only be more skillful than them. Why hasn't there been any movement yet? Wuxia frowned. Disguised as an ordinary guard, he carefully moved through the chaotic Wanling Palace. How should he deal with this? If he wanted the war to return to a stalemate, Wuxia had to help the Ling dynasty overcome this difficulty. But, looking up at the hundreds of Dao-breaking experts, who were madly hammering at the restrictive spells of the Wanling Palace, Wuxia could not help but shake his head. If he wanted to help the Ling dynasty, he had to fight these terrible guys head-on. Wuxia was not that noble. What did it have to do with him if all the people of the Ling dynasty died? At this critical moment, Zhang Tingyun's cold laughter echoed through the entire Wanling city. A speck of white light shot out from the core of the palace, turning into a white curtain of light that spread out in all directions in the blink of an eye. Amidst the white light, a 9-layered white lotus, measuring 100 miles in circumference, rose slowly. Every petal of the huge white lotus was emitting countless tiny immortal lights, which seemed harmless, but when they fell on the bodies of the demon gods, they began to rot and smoke like acid. Within a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles, thick black smoke rose from the bodies of all the demon gods, and their bodies were rapidly being corroded by the immortal lights. The white lotus of supreme purity, a supreme treasure of primordial given to Zhang Tingyun by Daozu for protection, a supreme treasure that the Ling dynasty used to stabilize the destiny of a nation, had finally shown its power. And when this purely defensive treasure was unleashed, no one could have imagined that it would be so lethal to the demon gods of the outer domains. Zhang Tingyun's complacent laughter rang through the clouds. Ignorant demons! How dare you come to Wanling City and act so presumptuously? I'll kill all of you today. Dear celestial lords, and thanks for your great strength. A voice answered as more than 3,000 powerful auras shot up into the sky. Hundreds of demon gods, who were waving their fists and smashing the restrictive spells of Wanling Palace, flew up into the sky in horror. For one thing, the pressure from the white lotus of supreme purity was too much for them to bear. And for another, the 3,000 auras were just too astonishing. Looking at the huge white lotus above his head, Wuxia suddenly had an idea, and he hurriedly flew into Wanling Palace. In a heavily guarded great hall of Wanling Palace, Zhang Tingyun had a white lotus above his head, constantly exerting his power to make the white lotus emit a dazzling light that illuminated the void. Wuxia pondered for a moment, then transformed into a breeze and carefully approached Zhang Tingyun. The white lotus of supreme purity was a supreme treasure of primordial, and Wuxia just happened to lack such a treasure. Chapter 10:17. Zhang Tingyun stood in the hall, his eyes gleaming with a ferocious light, his face contorted in a hideous manner. The white lotus of great purity floated above his head. Its immortal light as clear as water could wash away all the dust in the surroundings, but it could not wash away the anger in his heart. Everything should go according to Daozu's plan. He, Zhang Tingyun, should rule over Pangu and become the human emperor of this world. With the help of the immeasurable merits, he would become the celestial emperor, and with the help of Daozu, he would fuse with the Dao, becoming immortal and supreme. This was a plan that Dao sect had been planning for many years. Logically speaking, there should not be any deviation. But why had the fiend celestial gods from other domains fought their way to the outskirts of Wanling City? But so what if you have fought your way here? What can a bunch of evildoers do to me? Sensing the endless power in the white lotus of great purity, Zhang Tingyun laughed out loud. As long as Wanling City did not fall, as long as Zhang Tingyun did not die, the destiny of the Ling dynasty would never dissipate. Once the reinforcements from Dao sect arrived, he, Zhang Tingyun, would control an army of trillions and sweep across the world. You can't snatch the throne of the human emperor from me. And you can't run away from that beauty in the East Sea. Zhang Tingyun laughed wildly, dancing with joy. Wuxia, who had already approached Zhang Tingyun, raised his eyebrows and made up his mind. It was his business to covet the throne of the human emperor, but Wuxia could not tolerate coveting Princess Zhang Lu. Instead of leaving a dangerous viper staring at him from the side, it was better to kill him as soon as possible. With a cold laugh, Wuxia closed his eyes. Endless comprehension of the heavenly Dao was released from his divine soul, and his body disintegrated rapidly. Driven by the law of heavenly Dao, it turned into a faint immortal light and blended into the light emitted by the white lotus of great purity. The first wisp of innate thievery energy fused with the immortal light that Wuxia had transformed into, and like the soft feelers of a snail, It reached out to the core of the White Lotus of great purity. A terrible rumble came from the sky as the celestial lord of the celestial court, who presided over the Ling dynasty, fought against the powerful fiend celestial gods. Every strike from them had the power to destroy heaven and earth. The city of Wanling was shaking violently. The terrible killing intent made the soldiers of the Ling dynasty, the brutal fiend celestial, and all the living beings tremble in fear. And they wished they could find a hole to hide. All of the battles in Myriad Spirit City came to an abrupt end, leaving only the thousands of mighty figures in the sky engaged in a fierce battle. Zhang Tingyun laughed out loud. Complacently, he injected all his power into the White Lotus, and made it emit a white immortal light that covered the area with a radius of 1,000,000 miles. Zhang Tingyun laughed out loud. Complacently, he injected all his power into the White Lotus of great purity, making it emit a white immortal light that covered an area of 1,000,000 miles. The fiend celestial gods in pain wanted to flee the city, but the terrible pressure coming from the sky made them unable to move. They could only lie on the ground in despair, growling and waiting for death to come. In the sky, thousands of stars shone with dazzling lights of various colors. The celestial lords in the city of Wanling had activated their natal star powers, and formed a small star formation in the sky. Thousands of fiend celestial gods cast their own divine abilities and transformed into towering giants, fighting against the celestial lords. Wuxia paid no attention to the battle outside. Carefully, he melted into the immortal light of the White Lotus of great purity, and approached it inch by inch. The supreme treasure of Primordial was a supreme treasure born in the primordial world, and possessed unimaginable power. In the past, among the chaos fiend celestial gods, anyone who possessed a supreme treasure of Primordial was qualified to do whatever they wanted. In Panga's world, if a Tao-breaking or Tao-reasoning expert possessed a supreme treasure of Primordial, he could even ignore the threat of a Tao-fusing expert. The White Lotus of great purity was a defensive supreme treasure. Wuxia vaguely sensed that its essence law was purification. It could purify all kinds of energy, including all kinds of attack energy. All kinds of energy would be completely purified by it, so its defensive power was extremely powerful, because any attack would be purified by the celestial light it emitted before it could touch its owner. Unfortunately, Zhang Tingyun's cultivation base was not high enough to turn the White Lotus of great purity into his natal treasure. If he could completely refine it, his body would become one with the White Lotus of great purity. When that happened, his body would transform into a pure immortal light, filled with purifying power. No attack would be able to hurt him, and any attack that entered his body would be completely turned into nothingness. Currently, Zhang Tingyun could only barely mobilize 20 to 30% of the White Lotus of great purity's power. He was even relying on a set of special incantations and hand seals to mobilize the power of the White Lotus of great purity. He had not reached the realm where his mind and spirit were connected with the White Lotus of great purity. Therefore, Wuxia easily avoided Zhang Tingyun and approached the body of the White Lotus of great purity. It looked like a white lotus, but that was only its appearance. When he approached it, Wuxia discovered that it was a fist-sized, round, and flawless white light. Moreover, there were no defensive restrictions on its surface. Wuxia easily passed through the white light on its surface, and arrived at the core of the White Lotus of great purity. A flickering spiritual light flickered in the white void. This spiritual light was the core of the White Lotus of great purity. Controlling it would allow one to control the White Lotus of great purity. However, at this moment, there was an old man in a Taoist robe sitting cross-legged on that spiritual light. This old man had a pair of long red eyebrows, and he was none other than Red-Browed Taoist, one of the 9 ancestors of Tao sect. When Wuxia entered the core of the White Lotus of great purity, Red-Browed Taoist did not react at all. He just kept changing his hand seals according to the movements of Zhang Tingyun outside, shooting out beams of immortal light into the core of the White Lotus of great purity, controlling the White Lotus of great purity to release an infinite amount of immortal light to illuminate the void. Looking at Red-Browed Taoist, who was as dull as a dead object, Wuxia nodded to himself. This was indeed the avatar of Red-Browed Taoist, but it seemed that in order to facilitate Zhang Tingyun's control, This avatar of red-browed Taoist had been enchanted with some restrictions and seemed to have lost some of its spirituality. After all, Zhang Tingyun was the human emperor chosen by Tao sect, so it was already too much to give him a supreme treasure of primordial chaos to protect himself. If he left a complete avatar in this supreme treasure of primordial chaos to protect Zhang Tingyun, it would be a little embarrassing if word got out. This was for the best. Even an avatar of red-browed Taoist had unpredictable power, so it was best for him to be dull and rigid. With a faint smile, Wuqi's body flickered and suddenly transformed into a golden Buddha with 4 faces and 18 arms, standing 10,000 feet tall. In the void of the white lotus of great purity, he chanted a Buddhist mantra, and his body was surrounded by a pale blue glazed Buddhist flame. He waved the devil-subduing Vajra with both hands, and smashed the avatar of red-browed Taoist like a storm. With a loud bang, red-browed Taoist's avatar was smashed. The 18 devil-subduing Vajra in Wuqi's hands, which were composed of infinite mental power, were shattered, and his golden body was also knocked back hundreds of steps. Red-browed Taoist's avatar had dimmed by more than half, and it was obvious that he had suffered a very serious injury. However, a heart-palpitating aura was emanating from the avatar, and it was slowly opening its eyes. When red-browed Taoist opened his eyes, a suffocating pressure made Wuqi unable to move. It was just a wisp of his avatar, but the power it possessed was almost equivalent to all of Wuqi's magic power. Although Wuqi had a cultivation level of a half-step Dao integration expert, he was still not at the Dao integration realm. His magic power cultivation level could not be compared with those old farts who had survived countless eons. The 9 Daozu were also top-notch existences among the Dao integration realm experts. Their magic power cultivation level was more than 100 times stronger than that of the Huahuang clan, let alone Wuqi, who had just been reborn and had been cultivating seriously for less than 1 eons. Even though Wuqi's comprehension of the heavenly Dao and divine sense had reached the level of the Dao integration realm, the level of his magic power was still too low. Wuqi felt like he was a small boat in a storm, being twisted by the whirlpool and making creaking noises. The huge golden body stiffened in midair, and could not move at all. Red-browed Taoist could crush his golden body with just a thought. Sure enough, even if I succeed in the Dao integration realm in the future, I'm no match for these old farts in terms of magic power. Wuqi took a deep breath and suddenly shouted, "Red-browed Daozu, are you going to violate the agreement with the sages?" Red-browed Taoist, whose eyes were shining with the light of the sun and the moon, was about to fully open his eyes. The huge pressure around Wuqi suddenly dissipated. Wuqi opened his eyes. He used the Great Light Indestructible Amitabha Dharma Eye of the Great Light Indestructible Amitabha Treasure Scripture to draw back all the divine sense power of his 18 blood sea fiend celestial doppelgangers, which were active in the outside world, into his own divine sense of the Dao integration realm. Then, it turned into a colorful beam of light and shot out. He even integrated all the psyche power and power of merit he had accumulated in his body into this colorful beam of light. This was the strongest attack he could make now. After suffering a heavy blow from Wuqi, the beam of light had dimmed by more than half. Now, it was attacked by Wuqi with all his strength and the divine sense power of his 18 doppelgangers. The doppelgangers of red-browed Taoist were hit by the rainbow beam of light, and immediately turned into streams of light. Red-browed Taoist's sneer was left in the void. Amitabha, you are a junior, so I won't argue with you. Today, you will reap what you sow in the future. When your soul was destroyed in the past, don't blame me for being too ruthless. Wuqi's expression did not change, and he did not answer. Instead, he leaped forward and swallowed the tiny bit of core essence of the white lotus of great purity. A bit of Yuanling true flame burned fiercely, and quickly wrapped the core origin of the great purity white lotus. Wuqi blasted countless spiritual incantations into the core origin of the great purity white lotus, using the heaven refining grand technique, and quickly refined it. It was not only refined, but also carried out some micro-adjustments and modifications. In the future, Wuqi could not let the great purity white lotus appear in front of people. So it was necessary to carry out a certain modification to make it indistinguishable from its origin. Zhang Tingyun, who was roaring wildly, suddenly froze. All the light of the great purity white lotus above his head suddenly converged. Not only that, but all the petals of the huge great purity white lotus were also shrinking inwards. In just a few breaths of time, the primordial treasure had turned into a thumb-sized white lotus seed. With a chanting sound, the lotus seed turned into a beam of white light and shot through the air, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. Zhang Tingyun was stunned for a long time. Suddenly, the battle cries that had stopped for a long time rang out again. Zhang Tingyun felt as if he had been struck by lightning, and he screamed wildly in disbelief. A big foot with a radius of 100 miles suddenly stomped down, crushing the entire myriad spirit palace into pieces. Chapter 10:18. In the 33 heavens, the supreme Dao Ocean. In the palace of Dao Origin, red-browed Taoist suddenly let out a muffled groan. His body trembled slightly, and a trace of purple blood slowly flowed down from the corner of his left eye. Many of the powerful figures in the palace of Dao Origin were shocked. What could affect red-browed Taoist's body and injure his incomparably noble Dharmakaya? The other 8 Daozu looked over worriedly. Red-browed Taoist snorted coldly and said indifferently, "It doesn't matter. The great purity white lotus has been taken away." With a wave of his hand, an immortal light flashed through the air and displayed the process of red-browed Taoist's divine clone being killed in the great purity white lotus. First, the four-faced 18-armed Buddhist golden body launched a thunderous attack, which was almost a sneak attack. Then, the red-browed Taoist opened his eyes, and his profound spiritual power suppressed the Buddhist golden body to the point that it could not move. Finally, the red-browed Taoist was restrained by the words of the golden body, and did not continue to attack. The eyes of the golden body spurted out 7 colored rays of light, and shattered the avatar of the red-browed Taoist. "Amit Ba!" Red-browed Taoist called out in surprise. "Amit Ba!" White-browed Taoist, one of the 9 Daozu, sneered and said, "This boy has hidden his strength well. It's not surprising that he has such a cultivation base. In so many years, he is the first person to force the successor of the Lord Buddha from 100 generations ago to almost betray Buddhism. With such behavior, he can still hold the position of Lord Buddha. His means and cultivation base can be imagined." Red-browed Taoist said indifferently, "In that case, Amit Ba's spirit has at least reached the Dao-fusing realm, but his magic power is slightly lacking. However, as long as he reaches the Dao-fusing realm, it will be easy to accumulate magic power. In addition, he has obtained the great purity white lotus. If he really reaches the Dao-fusing realm in the future, he will be a strong opponent." Red-browed Taoist sneered and judged Amit Ba. "But he dared to hurt my divine clone. How can he have the opportunity to reach the Dao-fusing realm?" The other Daozu nodded at the same time and said in unison, "It's time to teach the Buddhists a lesson for wreaking havoc." They looked at each other and red-browed Taoist shook his head slightly. He had already signed a contract with the Wahuang clan and the others, so it was not appropriate for him to act personally. However, there were many things that one didn't need to do personally. Since the Buddhist sect had done such a thing, it meant that they had completely fallen out with them. What else was there to say? As they were exchanging their opinions, a bright light suddenly flashed on the divine seal decree. A name and a figure flashed past. Many mighty figures of the Dao sects in the primordial Dao palace cried out in shock. It was Zhang Tingyun's figure. In just a few words, Zhang Tingyun had actually been killed? There was also the scene of him being killed on the list of investiture of the gods. A huge foot descended from the sky and crushed the entire myriad spirit palace. Zhang Tingyun, who was a peak-level primordial immortal, did not even have time to dodge, and was crushed to death by the foot like a cockroach. The corners of red-browed Taoist's eyes twitched. He was the mysterious nameless Taoist in the story of Zhang Tingyun's miraculous rise in the Ling dynasty. In other words, Zhang Tingyun was actually his nominal disciple. Although Zhang Tingyun was the candidate selected by the 9 ancestors of the Dao sect to carry out the plan of investiture of the gods, he was the nominal disciple of red-browed Taoist. It did not matter if he died, but the foot had landed squarely on red-browed Taoist's face. With a sneer, red-browed Taoist casually struck the list of investiture of the gods. He wanted to guide Zhang Tingyun's soul into the list of investiture of the gods. and then he would make Zhang Tingyun the human emperor during the investiture, no matter how short the time was. This went against the Tao sect's plan, but for the sake of his reputation, red-browed Taoists could not care less. However, with a flash of black and white spiritual light on the list of investiture of the gods, Zhang Tingyun's soul let out a miserable howl, and suddenly turned into 10 beams of spiritual light that fled into the samsara. It was the same situation again. This strange scene had happened several times in the past few years. At least more than 70% of the targets of the Ling dynasty's intention of investiture had all their cultivation removed after their death, and then they were forced into the 6 paths of reincarnation. The souls of the fallen generals of the Ling dynasty were not important. 30% of their souls entered the list of investiture of the gods, which did not have much impact on the Tao sect's plan. Anyway, their ultimate goal was to become a god, so it did not matter who they conferred the title on. As long as there were enough souls to be rewarded, there was no difference between the souls of the generals of the Ling dynasty and the souls of ordinary soldiers. But Zhang Tingyun was different. He was the emperor of the Ling dynasty. If even his soul was sent into the samsara, how could the 9 Daozu keep their faces? Roaring furiously, the 9 Daozu sent all their soul powers into the list of investiture of the gods. A dazzling light shone in the sky, and a bright light was emitted from the palace of Dao Yuan, instantly illuminating the 33 heavens. The strong light stopped those devil gods who had been fighting in the 33 heavens. Hua Huang's clear and indistinct voice rang out in the air. "Fellow Taoists, are you going to violate your oaths?" The 9 Tao ancestors were enraged. Gnashing their teeth, they took back the bright light released from the divine investiture list, but the strong spirit power spread across the entire Pangu world and locked on Zhang Tingyun's soul. They had promised not to attack anyone, but they were using the power of the list of investiture of the gods to save the soul of their disciple. This was not against the rules, was it? As expected, Hua Huang clan did not say another word. Gnashing their teeth, the 9 Daozu joined hands and pulled Zhang Tingyun's soul out of the 6 paths of reincarnation. The list of investiture of the gods shone brightly, and Zhang Tingyun's soul was finally sucked into it. With the power of the list of investiture of the gods and all the powers of the 9 Daozu, Wuxia dared not to use the Book of Life and Death and the soul-hooking pen again. So he simply let the 9 Daozu do it. After all the power in Zhang Tingyun's immortal soul had been destroyed by him, and even the emperor aura of the Ling dynasty had been shattered. Now he was just an ordinary mortal soul. How could he get a good position when he became a deity in the future? Wuxia did not care about Zhang Tingyun's soul at all. Happily, he brought the great purity White Lotus back to the East Sea. Now that he had found a good treasure, he had to refine it as soon as possible. Not only that, he had to change its appearance as soon as possible, so that the owner of the treasure would not discover its true appearance. Wuxia was familiar with this method. Yuan Ling was a top-notch expert in artifact crafting, and there were countless methods in Scroll of Stealing that could change the appearance and conceal the aura of stolen magical treasures. With both methods combined, this great purity White Lotus would be Wuxia's. A loud boom rang out, and Zhang Tingyun's soul returned to the list of deification. As soon as he entered the list of deification, he roared at the top of his voice, "No, I won't die. Master Daozu, how could I be killed? I'm the human emperor. I'm the sacred emperor of the human race. The faces of the 9 Daozu turned extremely unsightly. "Shut up." Daoist whitebrows cried out sternly. The more noisy Zhang Tingyun was, the angrier the Daozu became. He was the human emperor, the sacred emperor of the human race appointed by Dao League, the future great celestial emperor, and the fated chance of fusing with the Dao. This was the plan that the 9 Daozu had been planning for countless years, and it was the target that they had set up beforehand. Now that Zhang Tingyun was trampled to death, it was a slap in the face of the Daozu. And yet he was still yelling here. Wasn't he deliberately slapping the faces of the Daozu? With a wave of his hand, he sealed Zhang Tingyun in the depths of the list of deification, preventing him from yelling. Gritting his teeth, Red Eyebrows Daoist pulled out a fist-sized red seal from his sleeve. It was square and surrounded by countless faintly discernible fire dragons. He handed the seal to his first disciple, Reverend White Sun, and shouted, White Sun, take this fire dragon seal and kill all the demons outside. Then, you 3 brothers will lead a group of fellow disciples to the Ling dynasty, and select a member of the Ling dynasty to ascend the throne, and continue the deification plan. Reverend White Sun, who had delicate features and looked like a virgin, bowed and received the fire dragon seal, then strode out of the Daoyuan palace with a gloomy face, turned into a beam of golden light, and rushed out of the Daoyuan palace. The fire dragon seal was one of the natal magic treasures refined by Red Eyebrow's Taoist. It was not only a supreme treasure of primordial chaos, but also the most terrifying killing weapon among all the supreme treasures of primordial chaos. It was a magic treasure specialized in killing. Compared with the purely defensive Great Purity White Lotus, the lethality of the fire dragon seal was at least 1,000,000 times greater. Red Eyebrow's Taoist had only lent his natal magic treasure to his disciples, so it could not be considered as him personally taking action. Naturally, he did not violate the agreement of the Tao fusing experts. Seeing Reverend White Sun rush out of the Daoyuan palace, Red Eyebrows twitched. He sneered in a low voice and said, "It's fine that the Wahuang clan lured the demons of the foreign domain to break the trap. She's a woman alone, so it's understandable that she used this method. But those 7, do you think we can't see that among those devils in the formation, the ones with the strongest cultivation base are all cultivating Buddhist techniques?" The 9 Daozu looked at each other for a while, and then Reverend White Eyebrows said lightly, "Senior brother, you mean?" Red Eyebrow's Taoist pondered for a moment, then slowly nodded and said, "That's exactly what I said." After another long silence, the other Daozu said indifferently, "Let's kill these demons first. We won't reach that step for the time being. If we really do that, the chances of us 9 brothers will be greatly reduced, and outsiders will benefit for no reason." Red Eyebrow's Taoist's eyes flashed and he said lightly, "Since that's what you said, let's wait and see. But if the Buddhists continue to violate the agreement, then the 7 of them have enjoyed countless benefits over the years through our hands, so we must make them spit it out." After a long silence, Red Eyebrow's Taoist said in a gloomy voice, "That's true. Let's see what they want to do. Let's start with proper means first." The 9 Daozu's cold eyes swept over the many powerful figures in the hall. These disciples of the Daozu bowed slightly and stood respectfully, not daring to look up and meet the terrifying eyes of the Daozu. Everyone knew that since the Wahuang clan had planted people in the Tao League, who could say that there were no reincarnated powerful figures in the Buddhist League, if they made the slightest mistake and caused the Daozu to misunderstand them, it would lead to a disaster. It was just that everyone was curious. What did the 9 Tao ancestors mean by saying such brainless words? Did they have any other tricks up their sleeves? Putting aside the chaotic thoughts of the people in the Daoyuan palace, when Reverend White Sun walked out of the Daoyuan palace with the fire dragon seal in his hand, countless demons immediately rushed over like flies that smelled blood. Reverend White Sun sneered and casually wiped the fire dragon seal. A dragon's roar rose into the sky, and a boundless flame enveloped the entire 33 heavens. Countless translucent dragon shadows danced rapidly in the flame, and the resounding dragon roars shattered the bones and flesh of countless demons. All the demons that invaded the 33 heavens were reduced to ashes, and the Taoist immortals who were fighting the demons in the 33 heavens cheered. A terrible killing intent swept over as several demon god leaders stared at Reverend White Sunday. Chapter 1019. With the vast 36 heavens of Tao as the core, countless fiend gods from other domains breathed out smoke and clouds, forming a great array that looked like a burning black lotus flower. The 36 days were the pistils of the lotus. The array was the lotus petals that were closing, and the powerful fiend celestial leaders were the crystalline dewdrops on the petals. Wherever they went, they brought death and terror with them. Before Reverend White Sun walked out of the Daoyuan, countless Tao immortals and fiend gods from other domains were fighting in the 33 heavens. They fought for every inch of land in the 33 heavens. Golden and purple immortal blood and multicolored fiend god blood sprayed all over the 33 heavens. After the almighty experts of Tao joined the battle, the immortals gained the upper hand in the battle against the fiend gods. They methodically reclaimed the lost land in the 33 heavens. But when the fiend god leaders arrived and formed a great array to surround the 33 heavens, the situation took a sharp turn for the worse. The fiend gods in the 33 heavens seemed to have taken stimulants, and their combat strength soared. Tao was completely cut off from the outside world. Tens of millions of immortals formed a massive array of Tao, such as the Demon Suppression Array, Demon Slaying Array, Demon Trapping Array, and so on. There were at least millions of arrays, ranging from 1 origin and 2 polarities to 7 stars and 8 trigrams. Almost all the essence of Tao's arrays could be seen here. They formed arrays to attack the fiend god array that surrounded the 36 heavens, but every time they tried, it was in vain. At the core of these fiend god arrays, a strange-looking 3-layered, 3-legged cauldron floated in a black fiend flame. This cauldron was the core of the fiend god array. All the fiend god's powers were injected into it, refined and fed back into the bodies of all the fiend gods. The power of countless fiend gods became balanced and pure, and all their powers were connected into one through the cauldron, making the array unbreakable. No matter how the immortal sword beams rained down like rain, or how powerful immortal spells formed waves that struck the array, the fiend gods in the dark clouds did not move. They roared and provoked the immortals, but whenever the immortals attacked them, they would immediately hide in the dark clouds. The huge demon god array slowly rotated like a nebula. The closer it was to the core of the 3-layered, 3-legged cauldron, the faster it rotated. In the core, the black clouds rotated trillions of times in a snap of a finger, while the outermost layer of the demonic god array rotated at a speed of less than 1 revolution per day. The huge formation was like a whirlpool with countless blades, shattering all the invading energy from the outside world. The Tao Gates immortals had been attacking the formation for several days, but to no avail. This strange array was like a piece of sticky candy. It was extremely flexible and tough, and it firmly sealed the 33 heavens. When perfected White Yang appeared, the scarlet flames released by the fire dragon seal nearly instantly wiped out all the foreign fiend celestials in the 33 heavens. Nearly 1,000 fiend celestial leaders who presided over the array formation immediately roared into the sky. Several of the massive fiend celestials rapidly shrank their bodies and transformed into black bolts of lightning that charged at perfected White Yang. As the first disciple of Red-Browed Taoist, Reverend White Sun's current realm was the same as Wuxia's. His understanding of the heavenly Tao was not as good as Wuxia's, but his cultivation was 100 times stronger than Wuxia's. After all, he was Daozu's most qualified disciple. In the eyes of the fiend gods, Reverend White Sun was a delicious cake that exuded an incomparably sweet temptation. The cultivation bases of the fiend gods that rushed out had reached the Tao-breaking realm, but they could not control their bodies' instincts. They sprayed saliva all the way and rushed toward Reverend White Sunday. Reverend White Sun sneered. His left hand unhurriedly shot out a talisman. The white talisman emitted a dazzling flame, spitting out purple, green, and blue true flames that turned into a surging thunder tide that whistled forward, hitting the fiend gods. The fiend god that bore the brunt of the attack was a 2-headed fiend god with a heavy carapace on its back. It even had a huge hole in its chest and abdomen. However, these fiend gods had strong bodies and extremely tenacious vitality. They ignored the wounds on their bodies and rushed toward Reverend White Sun while laughing wildly. The fiend god, whose chest had been blown open, opened his 2 mouths and lunged toward Reverend White Sunday. One of his mouths spewed out a pitch-black flame, while the other spewed out a white icy mist. The 2 opposing auras of extreme cold and extreme heat tangled together, transforming into a vast expanse of black and white sand that blotted out the sky and the earth. Reverend White Sun's 8 trigrams immortal robe emitted a golden glow, firmly blocking the bombardment of the countless black and white sand. At the same time, another fiend god wielded a heavy ghost head pestle and smashed it on Reverend White Sunday. However, it was also blocked by the golden glow emitted by the immortal robe. However, the power of the pestle was extremely fierce. Reverend White Sun could not stand steadily, and the cloud under his feet drifted backward uncontrollably. Meanwhile, the other 3 fiend gods darted behind Reverend White Sun at the same time and opened their mouths together. Amidst the whistling of the wind, a gust of black, white, and red wind transformed into a hurricane that swept over and pushed Reverend White Sun toward the formation that surrounded the 33 heavens. "Oh no!" cried red-browed Daozu in the palace of Dao Origin. But he was too late to save Reverend White Sun, and could not do anything. He could only watch helplessly as the few fiend gods threw him into the formation with tacit understanding. In the spirit cave beneath the East Sea City, Wuxia, who was watching the commotion with his divine sense, smiled. While Princess Zhonglu and the others were slaughtering fiend gods from outer domains with the fiend-slaying sword formation of Xianyuan, Wuxia, who had returned to the East Sea alone, was holding the supreme pure one white lotus in his hand. All the natural energy gushing out of the pyramid in the center of the spirit cave was absorbed by the lotus. Then Wuxia breathed out the Yuanling true flame and wrapped it up, gradually transforming it into an ordinary 7-storied pagoda. With primordial violet energy, Wuxia condensed the 108,000 laws from the kaleidoscopic star core into an exact copy. Then he performed an incantation gesture and sent them into the pagoda transformed from the supreme pure one. Immediately, specks of light appeared on the surface of the pagoda, making the ordinary-looking white pagoda colorful and emanating a primeval aura. Watching the commotion in the 33 heavens with his divine sense, Wuxia spent 80% of his attention on changing the appearance of the supreme pure one white lotus. Reverend White Sun roared furiously as he was thrown into the formation of fiend gods. As soon as he fell into the formation, his body was pulled tens of thousands of miles into the center of the formation by a tremendous and irresistible suction force. Countless fiend gods from outer domains burst into wild laughter at the same time. They raised their arms and activated their innate divine abilities at the same time. The innate divine abilities of all the fiend gods were sucked into the three-layered, three-legged cauldron at the center of the formation, then turned into countless black thunderbolts that shot towards Reverend White Sunday. Reverend White Sun could not move at all, like a fly stuck in a tree trunk, and the thunderbolts hit him accurately. The 8 trigrams immortal robe stirred up layers of clouds, and Reverend White Sun trembled like a sparrow in a storm. Then, with a crisp sound, the 8 trigrams immortal robe exploded, and half of Reverend White Sun's body was shattered by the black thunderbolts. It took billions of fiend gods to construct this formation to surround the entire 36 days of Dao League, and among them, there were over 1,000 fiend god leaders who had cultivated Buddhist cultivation techniques and reached the realm of Dao breaking. Even if only 1/10,000th of the fiend gods attacked, their attacks would be absorbed by the three-layered, three-legged cauldron and refined into thunderbolts that struck Reverend White Sunday. This was equivalent to nearly 100 opponents with the same level of cultivation as Reverend White Sun attacking him at the same time. How could he possibly resist? The pitiful 8 trigrams immortal robe was an innate spirit artifact, and now, it was completely destroyed in the formation. Reverend White Sun gave a painful cry as he sprayed a mouthful of blood onto the fire dragon seal. The seal emitted a blinding red light, and a boundless flame swept out in all directions, turning all the black mist and fiend gods in its path into nothingness. 99 long red worms that looked like dragons slowly crawled out of the flame. They roared furiously, waved their claws, and flapped their wings crazily, shooting out one column of fire after another that swept across all directions. This was the fire dragon seal, one of Crimson Daozu's natal magical treasures. It was a supreme primordial treasure specialized in killing, and its power was truly terrifying. A huge hole that was hundreds of thousands of miles wide was burned through the Great Formation, and all the fiend gods in the area were either dead or wounded. Even the 2 fiend god leaders, whose cultivation bases were equal to Reverend White Sun's, were badly burned. They had each lost an arm and a leg, then fled in panic. When he thought of his master's decree that he should kill all the fiend gods in the outside world with the fire dragon seal, Reverend White Sun threw his head back and let out a long roar. Ignoring the fact that both of his legs had been destroyed by the thunderbolts, he coughed out mouthfuls of blood essence to activate the fire dragon seal to burn the surroundings, making all the fiend gods flee in all directions. None of them dared to come within 100,000 miles of Reverend White Sunday. The fire dragon seal was best at destroying evil and slaying fiends, and its firepower had the power to burn all evils in the world. All the fiend gods in the outer domain had an evil aura in their bones, and the fire dragon seal happened to be the nemesis of their enemies. Reverend White Sun gnashed his teeth and slaughtered all the fiend gods around him. His left hand once again sent out a spirit talisman that emitted a misty white light to protect himself. In the white light, Taoist Red Eyebrows' true form could be vaguely seen. This was a protective talisman that Taoist Red Eyebrows had personally made and given to his disciples. Suddenly, a Buddhist chant rang out, and dozens of fiend god leaders emitted a dark golden light at the same time. Their bodies squirmed like flowing water, and soon, they transformed into strange Buddhist golden bodies. For example, the fiend god that was injured by Reverend White Sun's thunderbolts just now had 8 heads and 8 arms, and his body was covered with a thick carapace. These fiend gods emitted a dark golden Buddhist light, which temporarily blocked the burning flames emitted by the fire dragon seal. The Buddhist light surged out of their bodies like countless lotus flowers blooming and withering in an instant. Using the Buddhist light as a cover, they rushed to Reverend White Sun's side, and used all their strength to attack him with all their might in that 1/10,000th of a second. They had all used the Buddhist mighty Vajra invulnerable divine power, which increased the strength of their bodies by 100 times. When Reverend White Sun was attacked by dozens of fiend gods who were only slightly weaker than him, his body below his chest and abdomen exploded, leaving only half of his chest, 1 head, and 2 arms intact. With a roar, he turned into a bloody light and fled back to the Dalu Ocean under the protection of the fire dragon seal. By the time he returned to the primordial Tao Palace, his face was pale, and he had lost more than 30% of his cultivation. Taoist Red Eyebrows slowly stood up and said indifferently, "Those 7 old bald donkeys have really fallen out." The other 8 Daozu looked at each other and nodded at the same time. Chapter 10:20. Outside the Dalu Ocean, the celestial fiend who had revealed his golden body had severely wounded Reverend Bai Yang, but the 9 Daozu did not do anything, as if they had acquiesced to what had happened. Even all the immortals of the Tao League in the 33 heavens had retreated to the Dalu Ocean. The boundless Dalu Ocean had infinite space for these immortals to stay. All the surviving immortals and cultivators from outer heavenly realms had been teleported to the Dalu Ocean through a special teleportation formation that had been urgently set up. Even those who had only the cultivation base of Jin Dan, or had just stepped into the realm of Xiantian, were eligible to enter the sacred land of the Tao League. Except for the immortals and cultivators on Pangu continent, all the other immortals and cultivators had fled to the Dalu Ocean over the next 2 years. With the 9 Daozu guarding them, the crazy and brutal celestial fiends were not stupid enough to attack the Dalu Ocean, for that was absolutely courting death. Even if the 9 Daozu could not do it because of their oaths, the Dalu Ocean was, after all, the sacred land of the Tao League, where any of the restrictive spells could kill a Tao-breaking expert in a second. Who would dare to go in and have fun? The celestial fiend formation continued to besiege the continent for 36 days, but on Pangu continent, the army of celestial fiends had begun to wipe out the armies of the Ling dynasty. With the celestial fiend leaders who had practiced the cultivation techniques of the Buddhist League, the cruel and brutal celestial fiends did not do anything too outrageous to the common people of the Ling dynasty. Occasionally, they would eat a few mortals for a sumptuous meal. The frequency of them eating mortals was even less than the great deeds of Catfish, Gold Horn, and others who served under Wuxia. In comparison, the group of ferocious beasts under Wuxia were the real celestial fiends. One immortal sect after another was conquered in the Ling dynasty, and countless immortals were imprisoned like livestock. With the help of some special celestial fiends, these immortals were bewitched by a terrible aphrodisiac, mated like animals in heat, and gave birth to a large number of children in just a few years. These children were taken away from their parents by the fiend celestials when they were young, and were specially handed over to some carefully selected mortal families to be raised. When they grew up, they immediately began to cultivate immortal cultivation techniques. When Wuxia received this information, he could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. The methods of the 7 patriarchs of Buddhism were truly ruthless. They actually raised immortals like livestock. The reason why these devil gods came to Pangu world was to devour blood and flesh power, and the blood and flesh power of immortals was undoubtedly the strongest. The energy essence of a heaven immortal was comparable to that of hundreds of millions of mortals, let alone a gold immortal. Instead of devouring the tasteless flesh and blood of mortals, it was better to raise immortals as food. Moreover, this was also a helpless measure to maintain the position of the demon leaders in their own race. Demon gods who were savage and acted on instinct might obey the orders of their leaders for a short period of time, but with delicious food in front of them, if they were not given a full meal for a long time, it was likely that these demon leaders would be killed by their own race. Providing them with food, providing them with enough food, and providing them with enough fragrant food was a necessary measure to stabilize the ruling power of these demon god leaders. If these demon leaders were killed by their own race, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs would become the biggest joke in the world. The army of fiend celestials had changed from the brutal and plundering appearance when they first entered Pangu continent. Instead, they slowly and steadily began to take over the territories of the Ling dynasty. Carefully, they conquered one famed mountain after another, and invaded one blessed land after another. Just like how mortals dug up field mice to make food, these fiend gods carefully cut open the blessed land, and captured the immortals and cultivators from the immortal sects alive. Together with the immortal beasts and birds, they brought them to the farms they opened up. Wuxia was constantly monitoring the movements of these fiend celestials with his divine sense. When he found the farms they had built, he could not help but sigh. These alien creatures from outer heavenly realms were really powerful, and the Buddhist League behind them was really ruthless. It was a vast area about the size of 3,000 Du provinces, mostly covered with mountains and forests. With great divine abilities, the fiend celestials had gathered all the energy veins under the land together, turning it into a blessed land with a concentration of natural energy only inferior to that of Yuxiong Plain. Then they built a ring of rock walls around the area, 800 miles thick and 12,000 miles high. It was an appalling sight, and nothing so outrageous had ever existed on Pangu continent. The fiend celestials had built their own cave abodes inside the walls, dividing their living spaces according to their status and cultivation base. At the same time, the walls were equipped with extremely powerful restrictive spells. No one could fly within hundreds of millions of miles of the walls, unless they had the cultivation base of a primordial immortal. In this vast area surrounded by the walls, which was equivalent to 3,000 provinces, cave abodes had been built on every mountain, and small abodes had been built in every forest. The captive immortals were forced to stay in these abodes, having sex and giving birth to babies day and night. There were also a large number of mortals in this area, who were responsible for raising the offspring of the immortals, and raising them into adults. The offspring of these immortals only practiced the most basic cultivation techniques, and they did not know any other divine abilities or mystic arts. They did not know anything like alchemy or artifact refinement, and it was even more impossible to teach them offensive spells such as the thunder magic of 5 elements. Their daily task was to cultivate, and cultivate again, just like the pigs in a pig farm. When they were white and tender, they could be baked into a delicious roast suckling pig. About 70% of the immortals and cultivators in outer heavenly realms had come to Pangu continent, and they had basically joined the Ling dynasty's camp. But now, they were all captured by the fiend celestials, and none of them had escaped. The huge population determined that these immortals and cultivators could provide the fiend celestials with abundant and high-quality meat. While the army of fiend celestials was preoccupied with capturing the immortals alive, the Ling dynasty's army, which was attacking Du, had lost its leader and was at a loss of what to do. In the Battle of Wanling City, Zhang Tingyun's white lotus of great purity was stolen by Wuxia, and he himself was killed by the fiend celestials. Daozu had sent his disciples to break through the formation of fiend celestials to reinforce the Ling dynasty, and also to select a few members of the Ling dynasty's imperial clan to take over the throne, so that the plan of investiture of gods could continue. But when those fiend celestials brazenly revealed their golden bodies of Buddhism, and seriously wounded Reverend Bai Yang, the 9 Daozu were furious. In their anger, they came up with other plans, and so they simply gave up on reinforcing the Ling dynasty. As a result, the imperial clan of the Ling dynasty was wiped out, and all the important ministers of the Ling dynasty were killed, except for a few lucky ones who managed to escape. The huge army that had gone to Du was ruled by no one, and the soldiers were in a state of panic. If it had not been for the strong suppression of the upper generals, the army of the Ling dynasty would have long dispersed. At this critical juncture, the army of the Shizo dynasty withdrew from Diyu, and they followed the Fiend Celestials and invaded the Ling dynasty. While the Fiend Celestials captured immortals and cultivators, the army of the Shizo dynasty attacked cities of all sizes and took them into their pockets. What the Fiend Celestials wanted were immortals and cultivators, and what the Shizo dynasty needed were mortals. The two worked together seamlessly. Wherever the army of Fiend Celestials passed, the defenses of all the cities were destroyed, and the army of the Shizo dynasty easily marched into those cities. All the people abandoned the divine tablets of Daozu and replaced them with the tablets of Buddha. While the Buddhist League was busy seizing the territory and population of the Ling dynasty, Wuxia did not stop his little tricks. Great Wu had also sent a large number of troops to sweep across the territory of the Ling dynasty near Great Wu, capturing countless people and bringing them back to Great Wu. The immortal sects of Great Wu even took the initiative to extend an olive branch to the immortal sects of the Ling dynasty. In just 2 or 3 years, at least hundreds of thousands of immortal sects of various sizes from outer heavenly realms had joined Great Wu and submitted to its rule. In addition to ordering Wu Tianming to send an army to make things worse for the Ling dynasty, Wuxia had also mobilized the members of the dragons in the army of the Ling dynasty to spread rumors and stir up trouble, taking away a very large number of soldiers of the Ling dynasty. There were also generals loyal to the Ling dynasty who wanted to stop the members of the dragons, but without exception, they were all killed by the elders of the dragons who arrived in time. Under Wuqi's orders, the members of the dragons not only took away the soldiers of the Ling dynasty, but also plundered their armaments and supplies, as well as the wealth and people of all the cities of the Ling dynasty along the way. It was Ao Buzin who was in charge of this matter. With the soul-splitting spear, the dark nether crystal bottle, and the green nightmare thunder hammer, Ao Buzin was arrogant and domineering. Along the way, he led a group of elders of the dragons and killed countless fiend gods who dared to stop him. In the end, he forced the fiend gods of the outer heavenly realms to turn a blind eye to the dragons' actions and let Ao Buzin wreak havoc on the land of the Ling dynasty. In any case, the fiend gods of the outer heavenly realms needed the flesh and blood of immortals and cultivators, while the East Sea needed the army and ordinary people of the Ling dynasty. At the same time, Ao Buzin also plundered the wealth of the people. For the time being, there was no conflict of interest between the two sides, so they reached a tacit balance. After a few years of messy destruction, the organized resistance of the Ling dynasty was completely annihilated by the army of the fiend gods. Countless immortals and cultivators were imprisoned as livestock in specially open farms. The fiend gods even began to set up markets, relying on military merits or various rare resources to exchange for the flesh and blood of immortals and cultivators. According to their cultivation base and age, these immortals and cultivators were sold at a price of 1 tael per catty. It was hard to describe how miserable they were. Meanwhile, Emperor Wugo personally led the army of the Shizo dynasty to guard the original land of the Ling dynasty. Countless monks of the Buddhist League preached the essence of the Buddhist League in all parts of the Ling dynasty, using various means to force the people of the Ling dynasty to worship the Buddhist League. The fiend gods used violent threats to intimidate the people of the Ling dynasty, while the Shizo dynasty, represented by Emperor Wugo, used conciliatory means to win them over. In just a few years, Emperor Wugo had merged the lands of the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty into one, and the two dynasties were now united. In terms of momentum, he was strong enough to compete with Diyu. 6 years after Zhang Tingyin was killed, the last resistance of the Ling dynasty was completely wiped out by the dragons, and the Ling dynasty was destroyed. The situation on Pangu continent was getting more and more unpredictable. Undercurrents were surging in Pangu world, giving off an uneasy atmosphere. Chapter 1021. A few beams of light streaked across the sky, with a green talisman hovering over their heads. A faint mist emanated from the talisman, enveloped the beams of light, and blended them with the surrounding void, making it impossible for ordinary people to notice them. The beams of light flew past a group of fiend gods who were attacking a cave abode. These fiend gods with keen senses looked up in surprise, but they did not find anything. So they turned all their enthusiasm back to the heavily guarded cave abode in front of them. All kinds of thunderbolts and fire kept falling, shaking the hundreds of immortal swords in the defensive formation around the cave abode. The cave abode was about to fall into the hands of the fiend gods. Lu Bang, the king of Han, gritted his teeth and looked back at the fiend gods. He cursed under his breath and hurriedly fled with a few guards around him. Suddenly, Lu Bang coughed up a mouthful of blood and nearly fell to the ground. There was a black fist mark on his back, 3 inches deep into his body, from which wisps of fiend energy were constantly rising. The fist mark was badly mutilated, and the fiend energy was constantly corroding Lu Bang's skin. He shivered from time to time because of the fiend energy in the fist mark. After flying past thousands of mountains and rivers, a line of mountains that looked like a screen, hundreds of miles high and stretching for an unknown distance, appeared in front of them. With this line of mountains as the boundary, the territory of the East Sea lay to the east of the mountains. At the moment, the East Sea had stationed a large number of soldiers near the mountains, and countless formidable dragons were hiding in the mountains, ready to fight at any time. The west side of the mountains was occupied by fiend gods. The violent and cruel fiend gods had also stopped their expansion near the mountains, confronting the army of the East Sea across the mountains. As Lu Bang flew over the mountains, he happened to see a few dragons floating lazily above a cloud and peeing against the wind. They were casting a mystic art of the dragons, and their urine turned into a downpour that covered an area of 1,000 miles. In the area covered by the rain was a city of the Ling dynasty that had just been captured by the fiend gods. The fiend gods, who were busy hunting cultivators in the city, raised their heads and swallowed the rainwater into their stomachs. There seemed to be no such natural phenomenon in their original world, so they were happily playing in the rain. Lu Bang's face twitched. The laughter of the dragons was so harsh that he could not help but spit on the ground and curse in a low voice. Shameless, obscene, and so on. Given Lu Bang's character, it was obvious that these few heavenly dragons were extremely shameless and obscene in their behavior, since he scolded them in such a way. Wuxia was refining the white lotus of great purity with the Yuanling true flame in the spirit cave underground. At the moment, he had completely changed its appearance, and was weaving all the laws in the kaleidoscopic star core into a formation. Even if Taoist Red Brows came here in person, he would not be able to recognize it. While he was busy, Wuxia, who was constantly paying attention to the movements on Pangu continent with his divine sense, suddenly frowned. While they were busy, Wuxia, who had been paying attention to the movements on Pangu continent with his divine sense, suddenly frowned. He turned to the few Donghai gold immortals standing next to him and said, "Some outsiders have entered Donghai. Go out and see what they want. Well, their leader is not a good person, so don't believe anything he says." As he gave the order, Wuxia handed the gold immortals a talisman he had made with his own hands. The 4 gold immortals bowed and accepted the order, then hurried out of the underground spirit cave. Following Wuqia's instructions, they came to the west gate of the East Sea City, teleported 300,000 miles forward, then cast an incantation on the talisman and gently pointed it outwards. With a boom, the talisman disintegrated into countless purple runes the size of a thumb, which turned into a huge vortex that spun rapidly in the void with a dull rumble of thunder. Then, a cry of alarm rang out, and the void hundreds of feet in circumference in front of them suddenly collapsed, revealing a few beams of light in a sorry state. "Halt!" cried one of the gold immortals. "We are here to greet you by the decree of the Yan Huang Emperor of the East Sea. May I ask, what is your purpose in coming to the East Sea?" Lu Bang stopped in horror and looked at the 4 gold immortals who were blocking his way. The aura around the 4 gold immortals was concealed, and at first glance, they looked as inconspicuous as rotten wooden tiles. Lu Bang knew that this was a sign that could only be seen when one's cultivation base had reached the level of concealment. The 4 gold immortals were like unpolished jade hidden in a rock. Once the thick outer layer of rock was split open, they would immediately release a dazzling light. They were 4 gold immortals who had stepped into the realm of primordial, and were only waiting for the right opportunity to break through. Lu Bang cursed Wuxia in his mind. Even though he had established his own kingdom now, he was once a king of Diyu. How could there be such powerful gold immortals in the East Sea? Could it be that the East Sea had begun to recruit immortals when he was still the king of East Sea? Coughing violently, Lu Bang bowed to the 4 gold immortals and said, "Seniors, please inform the Yan Huang Emperor that Lu Bang, the king of Han, is here to see him." The 4 gold immortals waved their sleeves at Chi-Chi and snapped, "No, no. His Majesty has said that you are not good people. Leave at once." The immortals of the East Sea were all talented children selected by Wuxia from the people of the East Sea, and trained from a young age. The people of Panga continent were simple and honest. Although these children had been cultivating under Wuxia for so many years, they had never traveled outside. Their temperament was about the same as when they first joined the sect. When Wuxia said that Lu Bang was not a good person, they showed their emotions and embarrassed Lu Bang on the spot. Lu Bang and the attendants around him were stunned. Who would do something like this? Even if you want to avoid meeting guests, you have to find a reasonable excuse. Who would smash a wall in front of someone's face like this? Lu Bang took a closer look at the 4 gold immortals in front of him. Their eyes were as clear as water, as clean as newborn babies. He was surprised. Where did these 4 supremes come from? Which gold immortal of the celestial court was not a cunning old monster? If they were not cunning people with a temperament as deep as the sea, how could they survive in the cruel world of immortal cultivators? And how could they eventually attain the realm of gold immortal? How could Wuxia have such people around him, who had reached the realm of perfected gold immortal, and were as innocent as children? Seeing the 4 gold immortals blocking his way, Lu Bang suddenly dropped to his knees on the cloud and wailed, "King of East Sea, Emperor of Yan Huang, all the mistakes in the past are Lu Bang's fault. Today Lu Bang has come with sincerity. Are you really going to leave me in the lurch?" The 4 gold immortals were stunned. They looked at Lu Bang in astonishment, flustered by his snot and tears. Wuxia was staring at them with his divine sense. When he saw the 4 gold immortals' bewildered reaction, he could not help but sigh. He had made up his mind that when Ao Buzin came back, all the immortals in the East Sea would come to Ao Buzin and train for a few years. Such pure and innocent immortals, even if they had reached the Tao-breaking realm, might be sold off one day. It was better for them to be nurtured by Ao Buzin. In just 2 or 3 years they would become talents that could be put in important positions. Looking at the few sky dragons who had just peed in the wind, how mighty and noble they used to be, how high up they were. It had only been a few years since they returned to their old ancestors' side. And now there were these kinds of rascals who were 10,000 times more mischievous than ruffians. They really did not know how Ao Buzin disciplined his descendants. How could such people appear? After a few sighs, Wuqi's figure flickered, and a figure flew out of his body. He turned into a ray of spiritual light and flew out of the spirit cave. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of Lu Bang. Wuqi's clone glanced at Lu Bang and said coldly, "King of Han Lu Bang, you came to join me." "TSK, how can you say that? You are the son of the Celestial Emperor, an important minister of the Ling dynasty. How dare I accept you?" Lu Bang struggled to his feet, waving his arms and legs as he threw himself at Wuqi. "King of East Sea, please help me." Wuqi kicked Lu Bang, whose face was covered with snot and tears, and shouted coldly, "Don't stick to me. Do you think you are a top-grade beauty? Let's talk nicely. What's going on? Where are the people around you? Where is Han Xian? Where is Xiaohe? Where is Zhang Liang? And where is Fan Kuai? Why are you only followed by a few shrimp soldiers and crab generals?" The few heaven immortal guards around Lu Bang bowed their heads with flushed faces, and carefully moved to the side. Lu Bang, who was nearly kicked to death by Wuqi, jumped to his feet and said hurriedly, "Han Xian and the others are trapped by the fiend gods of the outer domains. Please, King of East Sea, forgive the former enmity and save them. As long as the King of East Sea can save them, I'll do my best to repay you, Your Highness." After shouting a few times, Lu Bang realized that there was something wrong with the way he addressed Wuqi, so he quickly corrected himself and said, "Not Your Highness, but Your Highness. As long as you can save them, even if you want Lu Bang's head, Your Highness, just take it." Wuqi stared at Lu Bang for a long time without saying a word, while Lu Bang looked back at Wuqi pitifully with tears rolling down his cheeks. After a full hour, Wuqi looked at Lu Bang with a pained expression and said, "It's very strange. Why did the king of Han come to the East Sea for help? In other words, why did the East Sea rescue King of Han's men? To put it bluntly, the grudge between the king of Han and the East Sea is very deep, and there is no kindness between the two. Does the king of Han think that Wu Qi's head was kicked by a donkey, so he went to save your capable subordinates? Am I crazy or stupid? Lu Bang made a grabbing motion in the air and pulled out a flagpole that was about 10 feet long. The black flag was wrapped around the flagpole, and wisps of spiritual light constantly seeped out from the flag. The flag was as deep as the endless void. Wu Qi's spiritual sense entered the flag and was almost lost in it. Chaos Element Sky Veiling Flag, the life immortal weapon of the Big Dipper Emperor. A treasure born in the primordial world. Lu Bang threw the flagpole to Wu Qi and said, "As long as the Yan Huang Emperor can rescue Lu Bang's subordinates, this treasure will be yours." Wu Qi's eyes lit up, and he grabbed the flagpole. He stared at Lu Bang and sneered. "Is the king of Han crazy or stupid? This is the life immortal weapon of the Big Dipper Emperor. Aren't you afraid that the Big Dipper Emperor will punish you for giving it to me?" Lu Bang stared at Wu Qi and said, "Now that things have come to this, how can I care so much?" Wu Qi was stunned and couldn't help but give Lu Bang a thumbs up. These words were too bold. However, the temptation of the Chaos Element Sky Veiling Flag was too great. It was a primordial treasure. So what if he offended the Emperor of the Celestial Court for a primordial treasure? If he offended the Emperor, so be it. Did the Big Dipper Emperor have the ability to come to the East Sea and snatch it back? Chapter 1022. The former king of East Sea's residence was now the royal palace of Yan Huang. In fact, nothing had changed, except the words on the plaque above the gate. In a parlor in the back garden, Wu Qi stroked the sky veiling flag of chaos on his knee with an indescribable smug smile on his lips. Lu Bang sat next to Wu Qi with a cautious smile on his face. He glanced carefully at the furnishings around him, but he would never pass by the sky veiling flag of chaos. Even Lu Bang himself was surprised that he had come to Wu Qi for help. But on second thought, who else could he turn to but Wu Qi for help? The Celestial Court could not be counted on. And when the Celestial Court's reinforcements arrived, Han Xian and the others would probably become some demon god's breakfast. As for Du, of course, Du had the power to help Lu Bang, but Lu Bang and Du had no such friendship. It would be a good thing if Emperor Haozuan did not cut Lu Bang into pieces, so why would he help him? Only Wu Qi was the most suitable candidate. Lu Bang knew how strong Wu Qi's subordinates were. The fact that they could force the Ling dynasty to a standstill proved that the East Sea was extremely powerful. Moreover, Wu Qi had established Yan Huang with the East Sea, which proved that he was not a law-abiding man. On the contrary, he was ambitious and had his own interests. Therefore, as long as Wu Qi was given enough benefits, even if Lu Bang had a grudge against him, he could still get help from Wu Qi. That was why Lu Bang had brazenly given the Big Dipper Emperor's immortal weapon to Wu Qi. Even if the Big Dipper Emperor came after him, Lu Bang was not a man without a trump card. As long as he revealed it, what could the Big Dipper Emperor do to him? At that time, if Big Dipper Emperor wanted to take back his natal immortal weapon, he would have to come after Wu Qi, and it would have nothing to do with him. Wu Qi gently stroked the sky veiling flag of chaos and glanced at Lu Bang with a smile. Lu Bang's wishful thinking could not be hidden from him. At Wu Qi's level, Lu Bang could not hide any psychological changes from him. But Wu Qi was very curious. What gave Lu Bang the confidence to deal with the Big Dipper Emperor? After all, the Big Dipper Emperor was one of the 6 celestial emperors of the Celestial Court. He had a high position and a wide network in the Dao sect. Lu Bang was only the unfavored son of the South Dipper Emperor. How could he have the courage to give the Big Dipper Emperor's weapon to Wu Qi? With a chuckle, Wu Qi calmly ordered the servants to serve tea. Naturally, a palace maid served tea to Lu Bang. He closed his eyes in front of Lu Bang. Yuan Ling's true flame spurted from his fingertips. The huge sky-veiling flag of chaos was wrapped in white flames. The trace of true spirit that the Big Dipper Emperor had attached to the sky-veiling flag of chaos was obliterated by Wu Qi. An angry roar came from the flag, but neither Wu Qi nor Lu Bang took it seriously. Now that the demon god had besieged the Big Dipper Emperor for 36 days, unless the Daozu took action, there was no way the Big Dipper Emperor could leave the Daoyuotian continent to find trouble with Wuqi. It would be best if the old man died in the battle with the demon god. Listening to the roar coming from the sky-veiling flag of chaos, Lu Bang sinisterly offered the Big Dipper Emperor his best wishes. Wuqi, who was busy placing a wisp of his true spirit in the sky-veiling flag of chaos, and working hard to refine the supreme artifact of primal, smiled and nodded. As the Big Dipper Emperor, it must be the grace of the 9 Daozu Emperors that he had a primordial treasure to protect him. However, with the Big Dipper Emperor's identity, he would at most have a trump card. Other than the sky-veiling flag of chaos, he probably wouldn't have a single innate spiritual artifact. Without the sky-veiling flag of chaos, the Big Dipper Emperor might really be killed by the demon god. That would be too convenient. Although Wuqi wasn't afraid of the Big Dipper Emperor finding trouble with him, wouldn't it be better to save trouble? After pondering for a while, Wuqi started to consider if he should let the Big Dipper Emperor accidentally get killed by the demon god. It wouldn't be difficult for Wuqi to create such an accident. Perhaps he would give it a try if there was a chance. The sky-veiling flag of chaos glowed brightly as Wuqi was gradually refining it. Strange fluctuations swept out in all directions, and Lu Bang felt as though he was trapped in quicksand. Immense pressure rushed towards him from all directions, and he exerted all his strength to barely sit beside Wuqi without being swept away by the invisible force. Lu Bang stared blankly at Wuqi, and he could only hope that Wuqi would finish refining the sky-veiling flag as soon as possible and bring him to the rescue of Han Xian and the others. If Wuqi hadn't used the time acceleration technique to envelop the reception pavilion, and the time acceleration reached 1,000,000 times, Lu Bang would have long lost control of his anger. After all, refining a primordial treasure wasn't something that could be done in 3 to 5 years. If Wuqi spent a few hundred years, Lu Bang would really cry. Han Xian and the others were Lu Bang's foundation. If anything happened to them, Lu Bang would have the thought of committing suicide. A deep and heavy black light rippled out from the sky-veiling flag, and the flag fluttered in the wind, slowly turning into a black torrent that wrapped around Wuqi's body, leaving only his head exposed. Wuqi's breathing rate gradually matched the black light's flickering frequency, and a faint heartbeat could be heard coming from the reception pavilion. Wuqi's heartbeat matched the black light's expanding and contracting frequency, giving the illusion that the black light and the black light had merged into one. Lu Bang looked at Wuqi in astonishment. How long had it been? Only a few hours had passed in the outside world. Yet Wuqi had almost finished refining a primordial treasure? What kind of amazing method was this? Lu Bang knew that in order to refine the sky-veiling flag, the Big Dipper Emperor had gone into seclusion for 100 years with Daozu's help. Time flew, and after an unknown period of time, the sky-veiling flag of chaos suddenly transformed into a beam of black light and shot into Wuqi's forehead. Vaguely, a sheet of black light flickered behind him, and his body turned blurry as if he had merged with the void. Lu Bang sat beside Wuqi, but he had the illusion that Wuqi didn't exist. He rubbed his eyes in astonishment and looked at Wuqi, but he couldn't see Wuqi's figure clearly. Lu Bang sucked in a breath of cold air. Wuqi had completely taken the sky-veiling flag as his own. With a smile on his face, Wuqi retracted the time acceleration divine ability, and the flow of time returned to normal. Lu Bang heaved a sigh of relief. He hurriedly rose to his feet, bowed respectfully to Wuqi with cupped fists and said, "Your Majesty, please save me." Wuqi rose to his feet as well. Just as he was about to agree to Lu Bang's request, an eunuch rushed in and reported to Wuqi, "Your Majesty, a distinguished guest is here." In order to refine the sky-veiling flag, Wuqi had devoted all his energy to this treasure. So when he suddenly heard that a distinguished guest was here, Wuqi's divine sense swept across the East Sea City, and his heart skipped a beat. After pondering for a brief moment, Wuqi gave Lu Bang some instructions, then grabbed him and teleported him out. After throwing Lu Bang behind the screen behind the throne in the main hall and hiding himself, Wuqi drew a few restrictive spells around him to conceal his aura. After that, he sat down on the throne and said coolly, "Since you are here, please come in." Wuxia was occupied with some trivial affairs, so I didn't come out to welcome you. Please forgive my rudeness. A burst of laughter rang out, as Yandan and Chu Ping slowly revealed themselves in the main hall. Wuxia could not help but feel shocked in his heart. The entire mansion was densely covered with various restrictive spells and defensive formations. Although over 90% of the restrictive spells and formations were not activated at the moment, all kinds of ordinary restrictive spells and space-sealing formations were operating at all times. The fact that Yandan and Chu Ping could teleport directly to him from the outside of the main hall so easily, as if all the restrictive spells did not exist, showed how strong their overall strength was now. Wuxia rose to his feet, walked down the 9-layered jade dais, and greeted Yandan and Chu Ping. This was the first time Wuxia met the emperors of the 6 dynasties personally, since they had regained the wisdom of their previous lives. Although Yandan and Chu Ping's appearances had changed a little, he could still recognize who they were. Both men were clad in a black emperor robe, emanating an air of grace and modesty. Every word and gesture they made was like a spring breeze caressing the face, pleasing to the ears. Wuxia knew that Yandan was the reincarnation of Emperor Shun, and Chu Ping was the reincarnation of Fuxi. Therefore, the aura emanating from both men was extremely peaceful and upright. Taking Zheng and Wei Wuji for example, one was the reincarnation of Emperor Zhuanxiu, and the other was the reincarnation of Emperor Ku. Therefore, their aura could be described as overbearing and fierce. The three of them greeted each other. Then Wuxia asked someone to bring the throne over, and invited Yandan and Chu Ping to sit on it, while he himself sat beside them. Although Wuxia was the master, the identities of Yandan and Chu Ping were still there. One of them was the Saint Emperor of the human race, and the other was Wuxia's father-in-law. Therefore, despite Wuxia's astonishing cultivation base, he had no choice but to show the utmost respect. Yandan and Chu Ping looked at Wuxia smilingly. Without wasting any time, they went straight to the point and told him the purpose of their visit. Do you hope to join hands with Yanhuang Kingdom, sending out an army to attack the Shizo dynasty and rescue the people of the Ling dynasty, who were in the abyss of suffering? As long as Yanhuang Kingdom was willing to send out an army, all the territories and people conquered by Yanhuang Kingdom would belong to Yanhuang Kingdom. Wuxia pondered for a long while, then squinted at Yandan and Chu Ping and said with a smile, Your Majesties, don't you know that the demon gods from the outer domains are now under the control of the Shizo dynasty? Chu Ping nodded and said with a smile, They can only control about 40% of the demon gods from the outer domains. They can only rely on those thousands of demons. If they can kill those thousands of demons, then the control of the Buddhist League over the demon gods will naturally collapse. Wuxia hesitated for a while, then shook his head and said, Your Majesties, are you confident that you can kill all those demons? Yandan gently tapped the armrest of the throne with his fingers and said with a smile, Zhuanxiu and Ku will be the ones to plan this. The divine weapons under their command are best at attacking and assassinating. What are those demons to us? As long as Yanhuang Kingdom is willing to send out an army, there will be many benefits after the matter is settled. After another moment of silence, Wuxia slowly put forward his request. It's fine for Yanhuang Kingdom to send out an army, but Yanhuang Kingdom will never be the one to charge and break through enemy lines. You will be the main attacker, and Yanhuang Kingdom will only be the support. In addition, besides the benefits we will get, all the karmic entanglements that are caused will be on Yu's account. As for those Buddhist monks, Yanhuang Kingdom can't be bothered with them. Yandan and Chu Ping looked at each other and smiled. Cautiously, they reached out their hands and gave Wuxia a high five to seal the deal. Chapter 1023. Inside the palace of Dao Yuan, when Wuxia obliterated the Big Dipper Emperor's true spirit in the sky-veiling flag of chaos, the Big Dipper Emperor, who was sitting cross-legged in a corner of the hall, suddenly gave a muffled groan and spat out a mouthful of golden blood that was surrounded by purple mist. Trembling like a sieve, he fell headfirst onto the spotless floor of the palace of Dao Yuan, with blood oozing out of his 7 orifices. As one of the 6 celestial emperors of the celestial court, and in charge of the celestial court's killing, his cultivation base was comparable to that of the Lord Buddha of the Buddhist League. But he was only a Tao reasoning realm primordial immortal, and the only good thing he had was the sky-veiling flag of chaos, which was given to him by Daozu. Because it was the only good thing he had with him, the Big Dipper Tharch had put in a lot of effort on it. 1/3 of his divine soul was placed on the chaos essence sky-concealing flag, and he was almost one with this primordial treasure. Wuxia had wiped out 30% of his divine soul and true spirit, which had cost the great emperor almost half of his life. In the great hall, thousands of core figures of the Tao League stared blankly at the Big Dipper Emperor, who had suddenly gone mad. After a long while, Ziwei Lingying, who was sitting next to the Big Dipper Emperor, suddenly came to his senses. Hastily, he pressed his palm on the Big Dipper Emperor's back, and carefully sent a stream of pure energy essence into his body. The South Dipper Emperor, the East Pole Emperor, and the West Pole Emperor also hurriedly surrounded him. In a flurry, they took out life-saving spirit pills and stuffed them into Big Dipper Emperor's mouth. They even used 2 spirit talismans to suppress the top of his head. After busying himself for a while, the North Dipper Emperor finally let out a burp and finally caught his breath. The faces of the 9 Daozu in the hall were livid. With their eyesight, they could naturally tell what had happened to the Big Dipper Emperor. 30% of his divine soul had been obliterated, which was simply killing him. Long-browed Daozu immediately calculated with his fingers, trying to figure out who was behind Big Dipper Emperor. However, even after calculating for a long time, the heavenly secrets were still in a mess. Long-browed Daozu's face was red, but he couldn't find the culprit no matter what. Big Dipper Emperor coughed out another mouthful of blood. He dropped to his knees and kowtowed to the 9 Daozu. "Ancestral masters, please help me." Red-browed Daozu waved his hand, and a gentle force lifted Big Dipper Emperor up. He grinned and exchanged glances with the other Daozu emperors. Daofather Crimsonbrows had an ugly look on his face. The North Star Emperor was a direct disciple of his lineage. Not too long ago, someone had stolen the White Lotus of the clear sky, and now the North Star Emperor's Chaos Heaven blanketing flag had been stolen as well. Could it be that during this period of time, Daofather Crimsonbrows's lineage had been robbed? Among the 9 Daozu, purple-browed Daoist, who had the highest cultivation base among the Daozu emperors, suddenly sneered and said, "That person's cultivation base is very high. I can't believe he can conceal his aura from the heavenly secrets. Now that the heavenly secrets are in a mess, it's even more impossible to find him. But as for the sky-covering flag of chaos, he will use it one day, and we'll deal with him then." Taking a deep breath, purple-browed Daoist raised his purple-golden eyebrows and sneered. "But I think it must be those people. Forcing him step by step, this was simply going too far. Junior brothers, where did Guarding Heart and the others get the courage to go against us? Because of those extraterritorial demons?" The 9 Daozu emperors pondered for a moment, then shook their heads at Chi-Chi. How could those extraterritorial demons be the 7 Buddhist patriarchs' trump card? They must have other tricks up their sleeves, but even the 9 Daozu emperors could not figure out what the 7 Buddhist patriarchs had prepared. Looking at the pale-faced Big Dipper Emperor, Daoist long-browed Daoist said coolly, "The plan of investiture of gods has been mostly ruined. According to the current situation, the Celestial Court will eventually succeed, but Pangu Continent will no longer be under our control. Are the Buddhist League going to take control of Pangu Continent and the 6 paths of reincarnation? They are a little too greedy." The faces of the 9 Daozu emperors were unsightly. According to the agreement with the Buddhist patriarchs, after the Celestial Court was ordained, Pangu Continent would be brought under the management of the Celestial Court, and the new human emperor would also serve as the Celestial Emperor in the Celestial Court. With the Buddhist League messing around, the future human emperor Zhang Tingyun of Dao League had been defeated, and the Ling dynasty had been overthrown by the Shizo dynasty. The situation was completely out of control. How many years had the Dao League spent to cultivate Zhang Tingyun? The reason why he had been reincarnated for thousands of generations was to cultivate a wisp of the innate aura of the human emperor in his divine soul. But now, the Buddhist League had killed him with a single palm, and all the Dao League's plans had failed. Moreover, the Buddhist League had gone too far. It was obvious that it was Lord Buddha, Amitabha, who had robbed Daoist of the great purity White Lotus. Now he had even taken the Big Dipper Emperor's sky-veiling flag of chaos. As the saying goes, a clay bodhisattva still has some anger, not to mention that the 9 Daozu emperors were not made of clay or wood. Slowly exhaling a long breath, purple-browed Taoist gradually withdrew his divine soul from the investiture of gods. The dazzling golden list of gods immediately trembled slightly, and the other 8 Daozu emperors hurriedly increased their control over it. After 24 hours, purple-browed Taoist finally succeeded in extracting all his divine soul from the list of gods and slowly rose to his feet. Junior brothers, please control the list of gods for the time being. I'll be right back. A cold gleam flashed across purple-browed Taoist's eyes as he said coolly, since they have done it, why can't we? Since the Wahuang clan has resorted to such means, don't blame us. Sneering, purple-browed Taoist murmured in a low voice, Pangu world is nothing but a tool for us to prove our great Tao. Even if it is destroyed, so what? The other 8 Daozu emperors sneered together. They locked their fingers together before their chests and remained silent, with a mysterious, chilling smile on their faces. Purple-browed Taoist slowly walked out of the main hall of the Palace of Tao Origin, and slowly walked to the highest spot of the Daoyuotian Empire. In the boundless purple clouds, purple-browed Taoist wielded his broad sleeve. The clouds in front of him dispersed, exposing a purely black, oddly shaped altar, hundreds of miles in radius and tens of thousands of miles tall, made from countless bones. This altar was clearly not in the style of Tao. Those bones were thickly covered in bone thorns, and some exposed skeletons looked even more terrifying. No living creature like this had ever appeared in Pangu world. Looking at this enormous altar, purple-browed Taoist's mouth corners twitched slightly as he chuckled in a low voice. 36,000 devil god bones were used to build this immemorial altar. What a shame for my old friends in chaos. They were powerful for a while, but how could they truly live forever? Walking on the winding path around the altar, purple-browed Taoist slowly walked to the top of the altar step by step. The ground here was as smooth as a mirror, and was made from an enormous skull. Through the translucent ground, 81 enormous air swirls could be seen in the skull, slowly rotating along a mysterious track. If one stared at these air swirls for a long while, one would have a weird feeling that one's soul would be sucked away by them. Purple-browed Taoist didn't even dare to take another glance at those air swirls. Instead, he quickly glanced at them, then took out a fist-sized, gray bone plate from his sleeve, and put it on the ground. Incanting a spell, this gray bone plate floated up and floated right in front of purple-browed Taoist's face. Looking at this plain, lusterless gray bone plate, purple-browed Taoist hesitated for quite a while, then shook his head and sighed. Guarding heart, why did you have to do this? If you didn't violate our agreement this time, how could we do this to you? Laughing scornfully, Taoist's purple eyebrows gave himself a light slap on the cheek and murmured in a low voice. Meng Yuan, have you forgotten what happened in the chaos? Ha, the strong prey on the weak. That's the truth. You've been a Daozu for so many years. If you truly forget your roots, you should die. Back then, those 7 Daozu were fierce creatures who dominated the chaos for a long time, and hunted countless of their own kind. Do you really think that they have given up their butcher's knife? The so-called Buddha is nothing but a way for them to recruit disciples. You can't believe it. A twisted smile that shouldn't have appeared on Daozu's face flashed across. Purple-browed Taoist said viciously, Lao Ai, remember where you came from. You can't truly become a saint by merging with the great Tao of Pangu world with the great Tao of Pangu world. How many worlds like Pangu world were destroyed back then? Are you truly invincible after merging with the great Tao? You have to be cruel. Otherwise, how can you transcend? Coldly and mercilessly glanced down, purple-browed Taoist murmured, all living beings are like ants. If they are killed, then so be it. Even if the humankind is wiped out, so what? If worst comes to worst, we can force the Wahuang clan to create a new one. Since you want to mess things up, don't blame me for coming. Grinning viciously, behind purple-browed Taoist, an enormous silhouette that had been releasing a dreadful power of chaos flashed across. He bit his right forefinger, then slowly swiped it across the gray bone plate with the blood dripping down from it. The bone plate instantly absorbed a giant amount of blood from purple-browed Taoist's finger. Then a deep, faintly audible roar came from the bone plate. The gray bone plate turned golden purple, and suddenly began burning. An invisible strand of smoke quickly spread in all directions. Within a blink of an eye, this invisible smoke suffused the entire Pangu world, then quickly penetrated the boundary between Pangu world and the chaos, spreading to the boundless chaos. After an unknown period of time, this smoke had already spread to an unimaginably large area. Deep in the chaos, in the core of a chaos swirl that was many times larger than 100 Pangu worlds, a deep laughter suddenly came from a gray coffin, which was made from an unknown material. The invisible smoke was immediately absorbed by the coffin when it reached here. Creak. The coffin slowly opened, from which, a man in a long black robe, with an evil face, slowly straightened his body. The man was over 3 meters tall, and his pitch-black hair was several tens of meters long. Every single strand of his hair was wriggling like a poisonous python, piling up behind him into a wriggling, heart-palpitating black shadow. He slightly sniffed, then abruptly showed a happy smile. What a nice smell! The smell of living beings. The smell of blood. The smell of blood filled with power. So nice. Slightly shaking his body, this man flashed across the vast space. With one teleport, he had crossed a space that was hundreds of times larger than the diameter of Pangu world. Chapter 1024. On Mount Gold Sun in the territory of the Ling dynasty, Han Xian frowned as he looked at the countless fiend gods besieging the mountain gate. Those who besieged Mount Gold Sun were a group of fiend gods who looked no different from carps with long horns. Their best attack was to spit out black slime balls from their mouths, which were extremely dense and fast, and the power of a random blow from them was comparable to that of a gold immortal. The defensive formation of Mount Gold Sun was on the verge of collapse, and the sky was filled with black slime balls that kept exploding, producing strange popping noises. This is retribution. Looking at the lively carp fiend gods, Han Xian instinctively thought of the scene where he attacked the city of Diyu with the demon sun-shooting carps of the Buddhist League. On that day he attacked someone else's city wall with the demon carp, and today he was attacked by a group of fiend gods in the shape of carps. Everything was predestined. However, on that day he did not gain any advantage when attacking someone with the demon carp, and was instead chased far away. If Mount Gold Sun was attacked by this group of carp fiend gods with sharp teeth and single horns, who knew what kind of fate awaited them? Standing beside him, Xiaohe Zhongliang, Fan Kuai, and other old friends of Han Xian had a very serious look on their faces, but there was also a hint of haggardness and worry in their solemn expressions. They had been trapped in Mount Gold Sun for a month. If not for Xiaohe, who had almost reached the level of Grandmaster in the art of formations and strengthened the mountain with 18 layers of defensive formations, Mount Gold Sun would have been attacked long ago. However, Mount Gold Sun did not have a strong enough foundation. Even after using up all the immortal stones, energy stones, and precious materials they had excavated in the past month, they could only form 18 layers of defensive formations. If they had enough materials, and if they could strengthen the Gold Sun Mountain formation to the level of 360 interconnected formations according to Xiaohe's plan, they would not have to fear the attacks from these fiend gods, and they should be able to hold out until Liu Bang's reinforcements arrived. With a wry smile, they exchanged glances. Han Xian shook his head, cupped his fist at Xiaohe and the others, and said, "I'm sorry for dragging you down for Han Xian's personal affairs. If you are lucky enough to survive, Han Xian will definitely repay you for your kindness today." Xiaohe and Zhongliang just shook their heads, while Fan Kuai punched Han Xian on the shoulder and said with a smile, "What are you talking about? We've been friends for so many years, hee. What's there to talk about? Brothers follow Lao Tzu and kill a few of them." With a furious roar, Fan Kuai's muscles bulged, and he pounced forward like a metal block, accompanied by dozens of generals around Liu Bang. Outside Gold Sun Mountain's defensive formation, the carp fiend god, who was spraying black slime balls to its heart's content, was caught unprepared. Fan Kuai swung the shield in his left hand and smashed the heads of 3 fiend gods to pieces. At the same time, He thrust the halberd in his right hand 1,000 times at lightning speed, ripping through the void and piercing through hundreds of fiend gods from their heads to their anuses with a thunderous boom. Only a few powerful fiend gods barely managed to avoid Fan Kuai's attacks. They flashed and teleported dozens of miles away, then opened their mouths and launched attacks at Fan Kuai and his companions. Countless black slime balls tore through the air and came whistling over, but Fan Kuai and his companions had long since turned around and fled back to the defensive formation. The slime balls smashed into the ground, producing a deafening rumble, smashing several mountains to pieces, and creating a bottomless pit tens of miles in diameter. Gold Sun Mountain's defensive formation trembled again. A beautiful girl in a white palace dress quietly came to Han Xian's side, and sighed in a low voice. Han Xian put his arm around the girl's waist and shook his head gently with a frown. This girl was the main reason why Han Xian and his companions stayed in Gold Sun Mountain, and were surrounded by fiend gods. After the disturbance in the mortal world, Liu Bang returned to the celestial court, followed by Han Xian and other trusted generals. Han Xian also met the girl, Lu Lanli, and the two of them became Taoist companions. Countless immortal sects from outer heavenly realms had come to Panga continent with the celestial court this time, and Lu Lanli's sect, a mid-grade immortal sect with an insignificant overall strength, had also laid down its foundation in Gold Sun Mountain. When the fiend gods invaded, Lu Lanli was cultivating in Gold Sun Mountain. While the fiend gods were besieging the mountain, Han Xian had scrambled to bring a group of people to her rescue. In the end, they were brutally beaten by the fiend gods, and after losing a large number of people, Han Xian and his companions were trapped in Gold Sun Mountain. Among this group of carp fiend gods, there were a few with incredibly strong cultivation bases. At the very least, with the help of the sky-veiling flag of chaos, Liu Bang had suffered a great deal, and failed to break into Gold Sun Mountain to rescue Han Xian and his companions. That was why Liu Bang had gone to the East Sea to ask for help. In order to rescue his group of absolute confidants, Liu Bang had sold out the Northern Emperor. With his arm tightly around Lu Lanli's slender waist, Han Xian said in a deep and powerful voice, "His Majesty will not leave us behind. He will definitely find a way to save us. As long as we can hold on for a few more days, we will be able to escape." Before his voice could fade away, a huge slime ball, about 100 miles in diameter, fell whistling straight down from the top of Gold Sun Mountain. A deafening boom rang out, and the immortal stones at the base of several formations cracked, while dozens of magical items, such as array flags Xiaohe had hastily deployed, were broken. Xiaohe glanced at these formation bases with his divine will, and could not help but exclaim, "An attack of this level is going to disintegrate the formation with just 3 more strikes." Before his voice died away, another slimy ball of the same size fell from the sky. The entire Gold Sun Mountain was shaking, and the mountain sank tens of feet into the ground. A few formation bases exploded, and more than half of the clouds released by the defensive formation around Gold Sun Mountain dissipated. In a way, the entire Gold Sun Mountain was exposed to the fiend god. Obviously, Fan Kuai's attack had angered the leaders of the fiend gods, and they could not help but attack this tiny mountain gate. The faces of Han Xian and the others turned pale as they looked helplessly at the over 1 million fiend gods who surrounded Gold Sun Mountain. A strange thought came to their minds at the same time. There were so many fiend gods, but there were less than 10,000 people on Gold Sun Mountain, which was not enough for them to eat. Fan Kuai sighed with a sad face, looking down at his strong body, then at the skinny bodies of Zhongliang and Xiaohe. He suddenly felt envious of them. Zhongliang and Xiaohe had been swallowed alive with just 1 bite, but he himself would have to be bitten a few times before he could swallow them. Wouldn't he? Wasn't it torture to be chopped into pieces? When the third black slime ball fell whistling down and completely shattered the defensive formation, Wuxia had arrived outside Gold Sun Mountain with Ao Buzin and his henchmen, as well as Liu Bang. Seeing that the defensive formation was crumbling, Liu Bang stamped his feet anxiously and cried out, "Your Majesty, please help them quickly. They are in Gold Sun Mountain. Please help them quickly." Wuxia grinned and waved his right hand. A beam of black light swept out like a wave, blotting the sky and covering the earth. Amidst a deep rumble that sounded like the slow rotation of stars in the infinite void, the black light enveloped the entire Gold Sun Mountain, including all the carp-shaped celestial fiends. With a wave of his hand, Wuxia rolled up the sky-veiling flag of chaos and captured more than 1,000,000 fiend gods. With a flick of his hand, a stream of Yuanling true flame sprayed out, and heart-wrenching howls came from the flag. The millions of fiend celestial gods were burned to a horrible sight, and they were just about to die from the heat. Lu Bang's hair stood on end as he watched. He knew how powerful these fiend gods were. Even when he was controlling the sky-veiling flag of chaos, he had suffered a great loss at the hands of their leaders. But when it was Wuxia who was controlling the flag, he was able to capture all the fiend gods in one fell swoop. It showed how big the gap between their cultivation bases was. Perhaps, apart from those top figures among the fiend gods from outer heavenly realms, there was no one who could compete with Wuxia. When one's strength reached a certain level, numbers could no longer decide anything. With a shake of Wuqi's hand, the millions of burned fiend gods fell to the ground, dying. Then, Wuxia incanted a spell, called out Lei Meng's true name, and offered the fiend gods as offerings. A bolt of lightning flashed across the void, and a faintly discernible crack appeared. Lei Meng's clone descended into Pangu world. With great joy, Lei Meng grabbed the millions of celestial fiends, then leaned over to Wuqi's ear and said carefully, "For the sake of the generous offerings this time, I'll give you a reminder. Run away from your world. Hide in the chaos, and come back when everything is over." Wuqi's heart skipped a beat as he looked at Lei Meng and asked in a low voice, "What happened?" "A world breaker has been awakened," Lei Meng murmured. "He is heading to your world. Our people ran into him when they were hunting in the chaos. He killed 2,999 of our 3,000 people, and only one escaped." Wuxia stared at Lei Meng, and could not speak for a long time. Lei Meng's lucky survivor was also a powerful man. He was worried that his wife would hook up with other people while he was out hunting, so he left a clone at home. In the end, his real body was killed, and his clone kept a wisp of divine sense. He was the only one who escaped. According to his confession, the person who had killed them had revealed his own name. It was a notorious name that had been passed down for generations in the Thunder Centipede clan. Thousand Heads the Breaker. World breakers were chaos demon gods that were born in a chaotic world. They were the cruelest, evilest, and most ancient existences. The reason they existed was to destroy all creatures. They stole bodies, blood, souls, and all other resources. A long time ago, the Thundermane clan was attacked by a world breaker, and the mighty clan was almost wiped out. Their original birthplace was destroyed. Now they were lucky enough to find a barren landmass in the chaos world that was similar to their birthplace. That was how they survived. Compared to world breakers, the fiend gods who invaded Pangu continent now were a flock of kind and lovely lambs. In front of the mighty world breakers, they were also targets to be killed and plundered. Leave your world for now, and take some of your people with you. Thousand Heads will destroy your world. There is no doubt that he will do that. Lei Meng shrugged helplessly and sighed. What a pity. From now on, I'm afraid I won't be able to get any offerings from you. I have to rely on my own hard work to cultivate. When can I become stronger? With a sigh, Lei Meng returned to his own world. Before he left, he sprinkled a great beam of blood-red light, which Wuxia put into his sleeve and kept for safekeeping. Thousand Heads World Breaker. Wuxia frowned as he searched his memory for the name. Finally, Wuxia found some information related to the name in the corner of Yuanling's memory. It was fragmented and not very important. After all, Yuanling did not care about such things in his previous life. But Thousand Heads should have been suppressed by the chaos demon gods led by the great Saint Pangu. Chapter 1025. After rescuing Han Xian and his companions, Wuxia felt uneasy. There were fragments of memories related to the Thousand Heads Breaker in his previous life, Yuanling. But perhaps it was destroyed when Yuanling was reincarnated, or for some other reason. The memories were fragmented and vague, and he could not find anything of value in them. In his previous life, Yuan Ling was an eccentric old man who basically did not have any contact with Chaos Fiend gods. He only learned about the Thousand Heads Breaker from a few words he heard when he went to trade various rare materials with some Chaos Fiend gods. The only impression he had was that the Thousand Heads Breaker seemed to be a very powerful figure, as he had killed and devoured many Chaos Fiend gods. In the end, Pengu summoned a group of formidable Chaos Fiend gods to suppress him. As for why they only suppressed him instead of killing him, no one knew the reason. After bringing Liu Bang and his companions back to the East Sea, Wuqi's heart was trembling, and he was shivering all over. It felt like he was lying alone in the wilderness in the dark of the night, and there was a black sticky worm slowly crawling towards him. He could not see or hear clearly, but the instinctive sense of danger was there. Wuqi's skin was covered with goosebumps, and the danger was right in front of him. After sitting in the spirit cave beneath the East Sea City and pondering for a long time, Wuqi flew up into the sky in a hurry, transforming into a beam of light, and flying toward the heavens beyond heaven. Along the way, several powerful fiend god leaders had caught up with Wuqi and tried to eat him alive, but Wuqi had smashed them to pieces with a single punch. Wuqi's fleshly body had become so strong that even a Dao-fusing expert like Great Horns could not do anything to him. It was easy to imagine how strong his fleshly body was. In sky beyond heaven, above the purple clouds, a small piece of land floated quietly. A few five-colored Luan phoenixes were leisurely flying above the purple clouds. Seeing Wuqi, these Luan phoenixes immediately transformed into beautiful young girls in colorful dresses, walked over smilingly and bowed to Wuqi. "May I ask, where did you come from, and what can I do for you?" Before Wuqi could say anything, the gentle voice of the Wahuang clan came from afar. "An esteemed guest has arrived. Yanhuang Emperor, please enter." The girls immediately shut up. They smiled and led the way, bringing Wuqi to the main hall of Empress Hua Palace. In the hall, which was simple yet elegant, sat Empress Hua Palace in the middle. On two cloud platforms on his left and right, Xianyuan and Shinnong, the Yan Emperor, were smiling and nodding to Wuqi. After bowing to the two emperors, Wuqi bowed respectfully to the Wahuang clan and said, "Greetings, Your Majesty and Your Majesties. I have come today to ask you something." The Wahuang clan pointed a finger at him, and a purple cloud platform rose from the ground in the shape of a lotus. Wuqi did not stand on ceremony. He flew onto the cloud platform and sat down. The Wahuang clan smiled and asked, "May I ask what is the matter, Your Majesty? Could it be that you have joined forces with Diyu to attack the Shizhou dynasty?" Wuqi pondered for a while, then said bluntly, "May I ask if Your Majesty knows the name of the world breaker, Thousand Heads?" Xianyuan and Shinnong, the Yan Emperor, were indifferent. They had never heard of this name. The Wahuang clan's expression suddenly changed. She almost stood up, but she forcibly suppressed the shock in her heart. She clenched her teeth and sat on the throne, frowning. After a long time, the Wahuang clan nodded slowly and said, "Thousand Heads. How did my old friend Yuan Ling know about him? I remember that my old friend Yuan Ling did not fight with him." Wuqi spread his hands and told her about how he had sacrificed millions of demonic gods, and how Lei Xiao had warned him. The Wahuang clan's expression changed rapidly. She narrowed her eyes and said coldly, we are lucky. If Thousand Heads had sneaked into Pengu world, the consequences would have been unmanageable." She pointed a finger at the rolling purple mist above her head. The myriad spirit cauldron let out a loud rumble, and countless thin beams of spiritual light darted out in all directions. Wuqi immediately sensed that the great Tao of Pengu world seemed to have changed a little. The barrier between Pengu world and the chaos was extremely thin, and even gold immortals could pass through it at will without any restrictions. But after the Wahuang clan's intervention, a restrictive barrier had appeared at the edge of Pengu world. This restrictive barrier faced the chaos in one direction, and if anything in the chaos wanted to enter Pengu world, they had to break this restrictive barrier. This restrictive barrier was very weak, so weak that any heaven immortal could easily break it. But it was also a warning device. If an alien creature invaded from the chaos, it would definitely alarm the Wahuang clan. With a gloomy face, the Wahuang clan silently calculated with her fingers. At the moment, the heavenly secrets were in a mess. Even a Dao-fusing expert could not get anything useful from the chaotic heavenly secrets. However, the myriad spirit cauldron above the Wahuang clan's head emitted a bright light. Wuqi easily sensed that after the Wahuang clan's divine sense fused into the cauldron, the chaotic heavenly secrets actually became clear and transparent for a moment. At that moment, the Wahuang clan had already understood something. She sneered and said, "Everyone really has their own plans. I lured the alien fiend gods here to destroy the descendants of Tao League and Buddhism League." However, the Buddhism League had already recruited a group of fiend gods, and now they have become the helpers of the Buddhism League. The 9 ancestors of Tao League were beaten so hard that they actually summoned 1,000 heads to break the game. Wuqi looked at the Wahuang clan and said in a deep voice, "What's the background of 1,000 heads?" If Wuqi remembers correctly, he should have been suppressed. The Wahuang clan pondered for a moment. She looked up at Wuqi for a long time, then suddenly smiled and said, "If my old friend Yuan Ling wants to know the details, why don't we exchange it with Yan Huang? Yan Huang will be annexed to Diyu, and Yuan Ling will hand over the human emperor's aura to Emperor Haozuan, who will preside over the fate of the race. If you agree, I will tell you the origin of 1,000 heads and some other related things." Looking at the Wahuang clan in surprise, Wuqi's eyes widened in confusion. Wasn't it just the origin of 1,000 heads? How could the Wahuang clan be so sure that he would pay such a high price? Did Empress Hua not know the current strength of Donghai? She actually wanted Wuqi to give up the entire Yanhuang kingdom in exchange for a piece of information? Apart from the lack of combat experience, the huge EC army alone was strong enough to fight against Diyu. Not to mention the dragons that Ao Buzin had recruited. Apart from the dragons, Ao Buzin had also recruited countless other demons and ghosts in the past 2 years. Even if the dragons were not annexed to Diyu, once the other divine beasts and birds were annexed to Diyu, they would still be an extremely powerful force. Was the information of a mere 1,000 heads worth so much? Looking at Wuqi, the Wahuang clan seemed to have guessed the question in his mind. She nodded and said, "The origin of 1,000 heads and other information are indeed worth more than the entire Yanhuang. Except for the relatives and trusted generals of my old friend. Leave everyone else to annex to Diyu. I will tell my old friend everything I know about 1,000 heads." Wuqi was a little hesitant. The Yanhuang country was his painstaking effort for so many years. It did not seem worthwhile for him to give it up just in exchange for some information. But looking at the cautious expression of the Wahuang clan, it seemed that 1,000 heads had a lot of implications. After a long moment of silence, Wuqi carefully weighed the pros and cons of the plan. The Wahuang clan just smiled and looked at Wuqi. Her slender fingers gently flicked the armrest of the throne. At this moment, Wuqi felt that the Wahuang clan was a fisherman, and he was the pitiful fish. Wuqi had no choice but to take the bait. If he bit off a piece of bait, he might have to pay the price of being covered in fish meat. It was difficult to calculate the trade-off clearly. After tossing and turning and thinking for a long time, Wuqi squinted at the Wahuang clan and said with a smile, "I don't think Empress Hua will let me suffer a loss." "So be it. But the dragons?" The Wahuang clan smiled and said, "The dragons? Why don't we let Diyu hire them again? But this time, we have to let Diyu hire them." Wuqi laughed. He opened his mouth and spat out the purple emperor aura in his body, handing it to the Wahuang clan, which was tens of feet long and as agile as a real dragon. The yellow Emperor Xianyuan and the Yen Emperor Shennong were shocked when they saw the enormous emperor aura in Wuqi's body. The Wahuang clan laughed and said, "Sure enough, it was you who killed the emperor of Nuyu, my old friend. I suppose the death of the emperor of the Ling dynasty has something to do with you, right? Otherwise, how could the EC have such an emperor aura?" Wuqi just laughed dryly, his hands in his sleeves without saying a word. The Wahuang clan put the emperor aura Wuqi handed over into her sleeve. Then, she suddenly sighed, pointed down the hall, and said with a smile, "Yuan Ling, my old friend, do you know what's the difference between Pangu world and other outer realms?" Wuqi was silent for a while. He thought about the homelands of those fiend gods from outer realms. They were all barren lands, and he wondered how they managed to survive in those worlds with extremely harsh natural environments. he asked hesitantly. Is it because of the difference in environment? There are more than 1 trillion species of living beings in Pangu world, while those outer realms have at most a few hundred species. The Wahuang clan shook her head gently and sighed. The biggest difference is that Pangu continent is constantly absorbing chaotic energy to expand, while other realms do not have such a divine ability. As far as I know, the territories of the hundreds of outer heavenly realms are still the same as before. Some of them have even been destroyed by the war between those fiend gods, and their territories are getting smaller and smaller, unlike Pangu continent, which is constantly expanding. Why is that? Wuxia asked in horror. The Wahuang clan smiled at Wuxia and said, because Pangu continent is alive. Pangu continent was transformed from the great Saint Panga's body, and it was constantly expanding, which was equivalent to the great saint's body constantly growing stronger. And the driving force of Pangu continent's continuous growth is the human race living on it. The more prosperous the human race is, the faster Pangu continent, which is connected to the destiny of the human race, will expand. But if the human race declines, the speed of Pangu continent's expansion will slow down and even stop growing. Wuxia stared blankly at the Wahuang clan, as if he had vaguely figured out some amazing inside story. Could it be that the great Saint Pangu is not dead? Wuxia asked blankly. The Wahuang clan narrowed her eyes and smiled. She shook her head gently and said, how can he die so easily? His body has transformed into Pangu world, and he is only sleeping. Chapter 1026. A long time ago, when Pangu had just created the world, Wuxi's previous incarnation, Yuanling, had used up all the auxiliary medicines he had. Since Yuanling's nether realm did not produce any of them, he left Yuanling's nether realm and went to a market opened by a chaos fiend god in the chaos to purchase some. Wuxia still remembered that market very well. It was a void opened by a few chaos fiend gods who were born with the ability to control fire. In a chaotic sea of fire tens of thousands of times hotter than the core of a star in Pangu world. On a piece of innate fire stone that had not been sculpted, there was a dilapidated street. On both sides of the street, there were some straw sheds. That was the largest trading market of the chaos fiend gods in the chaos. In retrospect, that market was as backward as an uncivilized primitive tribe. But all the almighty experts of Pangu world, be it the Wahuang clan, the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs, including Great Horns and the other almighty experts, had all grown up in this market. Wuxia even remembered that Great Horns had once colluded with a group of chaos fiend gods to rob the market when he was shopping there. As a result, he was attacked by countless fiend gods, who beat him up and forced him to flee in a panic. Ao Buzan seemed to have spent some time in that market as well, but the only reason he went there was to look for a woman to bear his children. Several female fiend gods who frequented the market got pregnant in the years after they left, and the children they gave birth to were dragons of different sizes. It was not hard to imagine what had happened to them. It was in this simple and primitive market that Yuanling found an innate spirit root on the stall of a fiend god. In the eyes of other fiend gods, this innate spirit root looked ordinary, but in the eyes of Yuanling, an alchemy grandmaster who specialized in dealing with spirit herbs, its age was simply incredible. It had lived for at least 10,000 times longer than the oldest chaos fiend god that Yuanling knew. According to common sense, it was basically impossible for such an innate spirit root to exist, because the few ancient chaos fiend gods that Yuanling knew were even the first generation of chaos fiend gods, and there were no living beings in the chaos before them. But this innate spirit root had clearly been artificially cultivated, and there were obvious traces of it being processed by human hands. It was so ancient, and yet it had been cultivated by human hands. Yuanling was instantly tempted. Relying on his powerful strength, Lord Yuanling sneakily kidnapped the fiend celestial from the market, and after a series of torture and interrogation, coupled with some strange medicines he refined that made people wish they were dead, the fiend celestial cried out and confessed the origin of the elixir. He stole it from the current purple eyebrows Taoist, who was a lackey of the chaos fiend celestial Swan and I at that time. Yuanling, who was addicted to medicines, immediately set his eyes on Lao Ai and his companions. After tracking them for over 1,000 years in the chaos, he finally tracked them to a strange place in the chaos. It was a portal, and after entering the portal, they found themselves in a small world similar to Yuanling's nether realm. It was densely covered with restrictive spells, which made Wuqi's scalp tingle at the thought of them. After following Lao Ai and his companions in the small world for over 100 years, an ancient palace came into sight in the void. Lao Ai and his companions stepped into the palace, followed by Yuanling. Then the restrictive spells in the palace were activated, and Yuanling's traces were exposed. The eccentric Yuanling had a disagreement with Lao Ai and his companions, and was immediately killed by the joint attack of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs. Yuanling had only heard from Lao Ai and his companions that the palace was called Ancient Sacred Palace, and he did not even know the origin of this palace. As a result, he was killed instantly, even though his fleshly body was one of the top 3 strongest Chaos Fiend gods. When faced with the joint attack of hundreds of Chaos Fiend gods, even 10 Yuanling would be smashed into meat paste. But now Wuqi heard the name of Ancient Sacred Palace from Wahuang clan. Pangu is not dead, but he has entered a magical state of creating a new world, said Wahuang clan with a deep voice, looking at Wuqi. Everything comes from the Ancient Sacred Palace. Wuqi nodded thoughtfully, then chuckled and said, I remember Pangu. He looks a little stupid, but I don't think he is so stupid as to create a new world for someone else. Since you said so, I understand now. What news did he get from the Ancient Sacred Palace? As Wahuang clan explained, Wuqi's heart sank inch by inch. Just as Yuanling remembered, Pangu, who had not created the world yet, was a simple, honest and kind man. The true forms of Chaos Fiend gods came in all shapes and sizes, and their characters were very eccentric. There were otakus like Yuanling, who liked to refine pills and forge artifacts, troublemakers like Great Horns, and scoundrels like Ao Buzin, who planted seeds all over the world. Of course, there was also Pangu, who was warm-hearted, but to put it bluntly, a simple-minded guy who was born to be taken advantage of. Pangu's fleshly body was very strong. Although it was not as strong as Yuanling's, it was still very strong. His innate divine abilities were even stronger, and his Chaos Divine Thunder made him famous among the Chaos Fiend gods. His strong fleshly body and powerful divine abilities made him one of the strongest Chaos Fiend gods, at least in the top 5. There were some Chaos Fiend gods who liked to be alone, such as Yuanling. There were also those who were unwilling to be left out and preferred to plant seeds and give birth to children, such as Ao Buzin. Pangu knew a fiend god named Qi, and they were on good terms. Bai Qi had created a small world in his mother's body, then created a race called Qi, with his own flesh and blood essence. In his own small world, he called himself Zhongdao Father and had a lot of fun. This was the greatest joy of Bai Qi's life. But one day, someone who called himself World Breaker Thousand Heads broke into Ji Hui's small world. He mercilessly took everything in Ji Hui's small world. The spirit Qi, the soil, the water, and the blood and essence of Ji Hui. Thousand-Headed devoured Qi like crazy, and in just a few days he had devoured most of the Qi's population, which had grown for several eons and had a population of tens of trillions. Flustered and exasperated, Qi went to fight Thousand-Headed, but was easily defeated by him. Not only did he fail to kill the enemy, but he also had most of his energy essence devoured. Fleeing in panic, Qi found Pangu, who was sleeping soundly in his lair, and begged Pangu to help him save his descendants. Pangu, who always liked to help others, excitedly carried the Pangu axe, the spirit divine weapon he was born with when he was born, and found Thousand Heads. Together, they fought a great battle against Thousand Heads. After a great battle, Qi was almost killed by Thousand-Headed, and Pangu was severely injured. Therefore, Pangu called his friends and summoned the Chaos Fiend gods to fight back. Because Pangu usually liked to be kind to others, many Chaos Fiend gods owed him big favors. Therefore, he only needed to raise his head and roar in the chaos, and tens of thousands of fiend gods would rush over. Tens of thousands of fiend gods would join hands and fight against Thousand-Head. After a fierce battle, Thousand-Headed killed more than 10,000 Chaos Fiend gods, devoured more than 10,000 Chaos Fiend gods, and severely injured tens of thousands of Chaos Fiend gods. In the end he was exhausted and fled. Pangu relentlessly chased after Thousand-Headed. At that time, only Pangu had the strength to chase after him. Along the way, Thousand-Headed brought Pangu to the ancient sacred palace. In the ancient sacred palace, Pangu severely injured Qianshou. However, with Pangu's strength he really couldn't kill Qianshou. Qianshou was simply an unkillable monster. Helpless, Pangu could only suppress Qianshou in the depths of chaos. Isolated from all natural energy, and without any blood essence to replenish him, Thousand-Headed fell into an eternal sleep. But Pangu also learned a shocking secret in the ancient sacred palace. Not long after he left the ancient sacred palace, he created a new world, Pangu Continent, and created Pangu World, a world full of vitality. Wuxia broke out in a cold sweat as he listened, while Xianyuan and Shinnong, the Flame Emperor, stared at Huahuang clan as if they had seen a ghost. Needless to say, the strength of Chaos Fiend gods was the biggest difference between them, and Dao-fusing experts was not strength, but that Dao-fusing experts were immortal in Pangu World. Tens of thousands of Chaos Fiend gods besieged Thousand-Headed under Pangu's command. But Thousand-Headed killed and devoured more than 10,000 Chaos Fiend gods, and also seriously injured all the other Chaos Fiend gods? What kind of amazing strength was that? What is the origin of the ancient sacred palace? Wuxia asked dryly. Huahuang clan laughed dryly and said in a deep voice, "The ancient sacred palace is just a relic, or a mausoleum." Relic or mausoleum? Wuxia stared at Huahuang clan in horror. Whose mausoleum? He suddenly thought of the spirit herb he had encountered in his previous life. Huahuang clan asked Wuxia a question with a dry smile. Is Pangu World large? Wuxia pondered for a moment, then nodded and said, extremely large. Although Yuan Ling has created a small world in his body, I'm afraid its area is less than 1/millionth of Pangu World. The Yellow Emperor Xianyuan and the Yen Emperor Shinnong nodded as well. Of course, they had created their own small worlds, but compared to Pangu World, they were just a drop in the ocean. Pangu World was extremely vast, and Pangu Continent was still expanding, which made Pangu World grow. Their small worlds did not grow as fast as Pangu World. With difficulty, Huahuang clan gave a smile, and a look of shock flashed across her face. She sighed and said, but compared to the chaotic void, Pangu World is just a grain of sand in a vast ocean. Not even a grain of sand, but a tiny speck of dust. Wuxia and the others nodded. Compared to the chaotic void, Pangu World was indeed extremely small. With Wuqi's current power, it would only take him a few months to travel across the entire Pangu World. But the chaotic void, only God knew how vast it was. Huahuang clan took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, the chaotic void is the remnant of a collapsed great world, similar to Pangu World. Our chaos monsters are nothing but the spiritual projections left by some powerful beings in that collapsed great world. We are the products of chaos powers absorbed by those powerful beings. The ancient holy palace is a mausoleum of eternal sleep built by some top-grade beings in that world. Wuxia, the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan, and the Yen Emperor Shinnong stood up together, staring at Huahuang clan in fear. That great world is called the Holy Realm, and the ones who destroyed it were world breakers. Qianshou was only one of them. Chapter 1027. With a heavy heart, Wuxia left the realm beyond heaven. As soon as he stepped out of it, two ugly and ferocious fiend gods leaped at Wuxia, their mouths wide open as they tried to devour him. Impatiently, he gave each of them a slap in the face. He did not use any divine ability or magic power, but simply used his physical strength to smash the two fiend gods whose cultivation bases had reached the realm of Dao breaking. The two souls screamed and flew up into the sky in a panic. A bolt of lightning came crashing down from the void, shattering the souls of the two demon gods. Wuxia pinched his fingers and grinned at the group of fiend gods in the distance, who were trembling with fear, then flew back to Pangu Continent with a gloomy face. What the Huahuang clan had told Wuxia shocked him, but at the same time, Wuxia was a little annoyed. It was obvious that the Wahuang clan had not told Wuqi everything she knew. First, the Wahuang clan did not tell Wuqi what Pangu had found in the ancient sacred palace, why the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs had gathered a group of people to go to the ancient sacred palace again and even killed Wuqi's previous life. Second, the Wahuang clan did not explain to Wuqi what kind of state Pangu was in today. Was he still alive? So where was his soul? How did Pangu, who was smashed to pieces when the world was created, survive? It was fine if the Wahuang clan did not tell Wuqi the first 2 questions. At worst, he could go to the ancient sacred palace himself to find the answer. In his memory, he still vaguely remembered the way to the ancient sacred palace. In a few hundred years, Wuqi would be able to find it. But the third problem was the most serious. How would the Wahuang clan prepare to deal with the 1,000-headed monsters that destroyed the holy world, which was billions of times larger than Pangu world? Looking at her calm demeanor, she seemed to be very confident that she could deal with this crisis. Wuqi did not think that the Wahuang clan, who had become a saint through virtue, could have much combat power. Aside from the fact that she was immortal in Pangu world, the Wahuang clan was as powerful as Yuanling in Wuqi's previous life. Back in Pangu world, she merged Yuanling with the great Tao of nature, and as long as Pangu world remained standing, Yuanling would never die. However, 1,000 Heads was one of the main culprits who destroyed the holy world. Could Pangu world survive his torment? Wuqi could take his family and trusted subordinates and run away, for he had not fused with the Tao yet. But for the almighty experts who had entrusted Yuanling to the great Tao of Pangu world, it was more than appropriate to say that a monk could run away, but the temple could not run away. Where could they run to? Where could they run to? Wuqi could find a corner in the chaos and hide for the rest of his life. How could the Wahuang clan and the others escape? Playing tricks on us, huh? Wuqi glanced at the space beyond the heavens and murmured to himself all the way, then transformed into a beam of light and flew back to Pangu continent. He had given all the Emperor aura in his body to the Wahuang clan, and it was very effective. As soon as it left Wuqi's body, the smell of the entire East Sea changed. The streets and alleys were filled with people who were in a state of panic. They couldn't say why they were panicking, but all of them seemed to have something pressing down on their hearts. It was very uncomfortable. They walked out of their houses and whispered to each other on the streets, but they couldn't find anything useful. The morale of the East Sea army was slowly waning. Hovering over the East Sea, Wuqi could feel that the elite East Sea army was turning from a high-spirited lion to a kitten or a puppy. Like the common people, the soldiers were anxiously asking each other for information. They seemed to feel that something bad was about to happen, but they could not tell what it was. Even the crops in the East Sea had declined by more than half. The crops that used to yield thousands of kilograms per mu would only yield a little more than 1,000 kilograms this year. Although it was still enough to feed all the people in the East Sea, it was a disaster year for Pangu continent, which had such a fertile land. Wuqi could not help but shake his head in amazement and wonder that the Emperor aura had such a huge impact on the East Sea. Heaving a long sigh, Wuqi was about to flee into the East Sea city when 6 bright lights came whistling over from the west. Yan Dan, Ingzheng, and others came to the East Sea in a fully armed ceremonial procession, escorted by a large group of Diyu's subjects. Wuqi could not help but shake his head and smile bitterly. The Wahuang clan was really unwilling to suffer any losses. He had just returned, and this group of people had already come to him. Were they afraid that he would move the East Sea away? So what if the people of the East Sea were handed over to Diyu? There were still hundreds of millions of people living in the small world inside Wuqi's body, and some heavenly ghosts and longbow men had grown up. As long as there was a sufficient supply of energy, Wuqi would not have to worry about a lack of manpower for training soldiers and selecting disciples. So, what was the big deal about handing over the East Sea to them? However, when he thought of all the efforts he had made for the East Sea over the years, Wuqi could not help but sigh. His sigh was heard by Yan Dan and others. From a distance, Yan Dan said, "Wuqi, you have been wronged by this. But, for the sake of the destiny of the human race, we have no choice. Please don't blame us." Wuqi waved his hand weakly. Ignoring Yan Dan and others, He covered the entire territory controlled by the East Sea with his divine will. Then Wuqi's voice spread across the East Sea. From today onwards, Yanhuang Kingdom is bankrupt. All the soldiers and officials of Yanhuang Kingdom will be under the rule of Diyu. If there is any trouble, find the officials of Diyu to handle it. I don't care about anything else. The soldiers and officials of Yanhuang Kingdom could hear it clearly. It was Wuqi's voice. The people looked at each other, speechless. It seemed that Yanhuang Kingdom had just been established a few years ago. Why did it revert to Diyu today? But it was fine. After all, they would be the people of Diyu for generations. There was nothing wrong with reverting. However, the Yanhuang country soldiers and officials were dumbfounded. From all directions, the soldiers roared crazily, and some impulsive generals used their mystiques to rush towards the East Sea city. Each of them was brimming with murderous intent, ready to kill. Wuqi had brainwashed all the officials and soldiers in the East Sea, and these people were Wuqi's diehard followers. The Yanhuang Kingdom had not even had a full-scale conflict with them, but they had suddenly merged with Diyu. It would be strange if these officials and generals were not convinced. They all thought that Wuqi had been threatened by outsiders. Therefore they rushed to the East Sea city. One was to protect the master, and the other was to kill the enemy. All the cities in Yanhuang Kingdom were connected to the East Sea city by teleportation formations. Spiritual lights flashed on dozens of teleportation formations. Large groups of civil and military officials and countless elite soldiers of the East Sea swarmed out, surrounding the huge East Sea city, so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Monstrous murderous auras surged towards the chariots of the 6 divine emperors in the sky. The murderous auras that seemed to materialize smashed the clouds in the sky. The chariots of Yandan and the others all shook violently. Fortunately, their cultivation levels were high, and they barely managed to stabilize the chariots. The 6 divine emperors had gone through thousands of reincarnations and accumulated endless power. They were now at the pinnacle of the Tao integration realm. They were only one step away from the Tao integration realm. They were not on the same path because of the agreement between the Wahuang clan and the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs. After all, once they reached the Tao integration realm, they could no longer fight. They had lost 6 great experts for no reason. But like Wuqi, they were all half-stepped to the Tao integration realm. Even so, their chariots were almost knocked out of the sky by the murderous auras emanating from the soldiers of the East Sea. One could imagine how strong the murderous aura of the soldiers of the East Sea was, and how many soldiers of the East Sea had gathered around the East Sea city. The ordinary soldiers surrounded the entire East Sea city, like a dark ocean. But the generals of the army were all hovering in midair. Just the generals of the East Sea prefecture above the level of golden immortals formed a thick, dark cloud that blocked out the sunlight within 1,000 miles of the East Sea city. Many of East Sea's courtiers looked at the generals of the East Sea hovering in the void in astonishment. Not even Diyu's Yuxiong army had such a large number of generals whose cultivation bases were above the realm of the second Pangu heaven. Diyu's conscription rate had always been very low. In many places, he only conscripted 1 soldier for each of the hundreds of thousands of people. A prefecture with a circumference of 1,000,000 miles was usually guarded by only a few hundred soldiers. But Wuqi did not care about this in the East Sea. What he did in the East Sea could be described as militaristic. He feared that there were not enough soldiers in the East Sea, and that the East Sea would suffer a loss in military strength. That was why he conscripted a large number of soldiers, and did not hesitate to use the elixir of the primordial divine tree in Yuanling's nether realm to refine pills to prolong the lives of the soldiers. In some cities of the East Sea, Wuqi had even managed to produce 1 soldier for every 100 able-bodied men. Judging from the ratio of conscription alone, the relative density of the soldiers in the East Sea was hundreds or even thousands of times higher than that in Diyu. The East Sea army had a large base, so there were many generals in the army. The dark cloud of generals in the sky was the embodiment of the huge army of the East Sea. Looking at the almost abnormal army of the East Sea, the ministers of Diyu who accompanied the 6 saint emperors were all at a loss for words. When the 6 states submitted to Diyu, 6/7 of the army of the East Sea was taken away. How come the size of the army of the East Sea increased instead of decreasing in just a few years? Was Wuxia addicted to exploding soldiers? After a long silence, Wuxia coughed lightly and said in a flat tone, "My dear ministers, please listen to me. If you are willing to follow me, I will guarantee you a long life of wealth and prosperity. If you are not willing to follow me, you can stay in the East Sea and submit to Du." The ordinary people did not say a word. They had no opinions of their own. Whether they followed Wuxia or Du, weren't they all living the same life? But when the soldiers and ministers of the East Sea heard Wuqi's words, they roared like a tsunami. "We swear to follow your majesty to the death. We swear to follow your majesty to the death." The wild roar shook the East Sea and set off huge waves. Countless giant dragons took advantage of the situation and rose up, stirring up wind and waves in the East Sea. Yandan exchanged a look with the other 5 saint emperors. With the morale of the army of the East Sea like this, they had no choice but to let Wuxia take them away. It was not a big deal. All they wanted was the hundreds of millions of people in the East Sea and the enormous power of faith they brought. While Yandan and Wuxia were talking, Jidai, the king of Qingqiu, who had been standing next to Yandan's chariot, suddenly flew toward Wuxia. When he was less than 1,000 feet away from Wuxia, he cried out, "King of East Sea, I am under the order of His Majesty to kill you traitors." Wuxia was taken aback. Jidai waved his hand and a beam of purple smoke smashed toward Wuqi's chest with a thunderous sound. Chapter 10:28. The purple light moved so fast that it hit Wuqi's body almost instantaneously. A series of thunderclaps rang out. In the blink of an eye, at least 100,000 thunderstorms with the power equivalent to the full-force attack of a peak-level Dao-breaking expert exploded within 3 feet around Wuqi. All the power exploded on the surface of Wuqi's body under the effect of the powerful restrictive spell, without any leakage. Such a heavy blow would severely injure even an ordinary Dao-fusing expert, but it was not enough to threaten their lives. But Wuqi's fleshly body had reached the mastery stage in the last chapter of the heaven-refining grand magic, and his fleshly body was 100 times stronger than it was in his previous life. Although the thunderstorms with the power of a peak-level Dao-breaking expert 100,000 times were terrifying, they only tore a piece of his robe and burned a few of his hairs to ashes. When the purple mist dissipated and the thunderbolts vanished, Wuqi appeared in front of everyone, naked and emitting a faint purple smoke. His streamlined muscles were pulsing gently, and his whole body was glowing with a warm light like a pearl. It was a very comfortable color, but it gave the illusion that he was indestructible. When everyone saw Wuqi's body, they suddenly had an instinctive realization. It was a freakish fleshly body that was 1,000,000 times stronger than the Buddhist League's Vajradharma body. Wuqi was in a bad mood after being bombarded by the thunderbolts 100,000 times. If he had not mastered the heaven-refining grand magic, the thunderbolt could have blown his body to pieces. Then, with the list of deification controlled by Daozu to monitor the entire Pangu continent, his soul and true spirit would have nowhere to run. Would he have to be sucked into the list of deification and wait for the celestial court to confer a title on him? That would be a real bastard. Looking coldly at Jidai, whose face was deathly pale and whose body was drenched in cold sweat, Wuqi chuckled and said, "Surprised? You didn't kill me? Why did you use a talisman from the Dao League when you were ordered to kill me by the human emperor? Is the human emperor a disciple of the Dao League?" Jidai closed his eyes, then clenched his teeth until they broke. Wuqi leaped forward, grabbed Jidai's chin, and brutally crushed half of his gums with his fingers. He grabbed half of Jidai's face with his claw, ripping out the flesh, cheekbone, and sticky green venom from his mouth. A fist-sized hole appeared on Jidai's face. He howled in pain, but the venom in his broken teeth didn't flow into his stomach, so he was still alive. Then he threw the piece of flesh into the distance. The green venom began to corrode it, and in just a blink of an eye, it had turned into a clump of green pus that drifted down to the ground. Only then did Yandan and the others cry out in alarm. They suddenly realized what Jidai's behavior meant. Emperor Haozuan had ordered Wuqi to be killed? If Wuxia hadn't blocked the blow that could severely wound a Dao-fusing expert with his freakishly strong body, Wuxia would have been killed on the spot. What then? What would the hundreds of millions of soldiers of the East Sea, who were already emanating boundless killing intent, do? They would swarm forward like a pack of enraged wolves and kill every single one of Diyu's officials present. Even if Yandan and the others were the reincarnations of 6 Saint Emperors, and even if they were all half-step Dao-fusing experts, it would be useless. This was the East Sea, and below them was the East Sea City. Once the East Sea City's defenses were activated, countless ferocious soldiers of the East Sea would swarm forward in a frenzy. Even a half-step Dao-fusing expert would be chopped into minced meat. It was just a matter of killing a few more soldiers of the East Sea before they died. Cold sweat trickled down Yandan's back. He opened his mouth and was about to yell at the Dayu officials accompanying him. But there wasn't much time left for Yandan and the others. He had just opened his mouth and was about to roar when an angry roar came from behind. By the order of the Yan Huang Emperor, we are going to kill the evildoer Yandan. How dare you pretend to be the human sovereign's Saint Emperor? The roar stunned Wuxia. It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck Wuqi's head, leaving him speechless for a long time. Since when did he order people to kill Yandan and the others? Wasn't Yandan and the others here to take over the territories of the Yanhuang country under the decree of the Wahuang clan? It was just a matter of how many people and assets they would take over. Wuxia was preparing to leave with the soldiers of the East Sea who were loyal to him. However, one of the generals standing behind Yandan, and judging from the way he attacked, he should be a member of Jingke clan. His body transformed into a fist-thick beam of light, and shot out like a rainbow, aiming straight at the back of Yandan's head. It was the technique of risking one's life and assassinating that Jingke had been practicing. Judging from the posture and aura of this person, he had already mastered the essence of this assassination technique. Yandan snorted coldly. A thick layer of heaven and earth aura towered up into the sky around him, condensing into a wheel with a diameter of 1,000 feet behind him. With a loud rumble, he pressed his palm against the incoming beam of light. With a slight push of his palm, a loud crack was heard, and the beam of light was shattered. The dagger that the man was wielding, which was at least a top-grade gold immortal treasure, was shattered into pieces. Except for his skull, all the bones in his body were shattered by Yandan. With a miserable howl, the man fell heavily onto Yandan's chariot. But he twisted his body crazily, opened his mouth and bit at Yandan's ankle. His teeth were tinged with a strange, bright green color. Obviously, he had used some strange method to coat his teeth with poison. He was completely risking his life. Even if he had to die, he only wanted to injure Yandan, even if it was just a scratch. Yandan snorted coldly. He lifted his foot and stomped heavily on the man's head. A loud bang rang out, and the man's head was almost crushed by Yandan's foot. Then Yandan snapped. "What nonsense are you talking about, Jing Wuming? Who gave you the order to kill me?" Just as Yandan finished off Jing Wuming, Yingzheng and the other 4 Saint Emperors in the 5 chariots next to him were attacked by assassins at the same time. The assassins were all the strongest among their closest confidants and guards. Jing Wuming roared and many of them struck at the same time. Their attacks were extremely ruthless and decisive, aiming at the vital parts of Yingzheng and the others. Moreover, the weapons they used were supreme-grade gold immortal artifacts that were extremely powerful and dipped in all kinds of strange and evil poisons. Even a Saint Emperor might not be able to withstand their attacks. But Yingzheng and the others were, after all, strong cultivators, and they had been on their guard when Ji Dai tried to assassinate Wuqi. So, although they were attacked out of the blue by the people around them, they still reacted quickly and fought back in time. Without exception, Yingzheng and the others had cultivated the body-tempering cultivation technique of the human race to the level of peak-level Dao-fusing expert. With just a gentle slap, they had the power to destroy the starry sky. These assassins had never dreamed that Yingzheng and the others were so strong that they were so easily injured and knocked down. The assassination was not over yet. Just as Yandan stepped on Jing Wuming's head, miserable howls came from the Diyu officials who accompanied them. Some of the officials in Diyu were civil officials, and some were military officials. Most of the civil officials cultivated the Taoist path, But there was also a large group of civil officials who focused on studying various strategies to govern the country. They were purely administrative officials, and were not good at any martial arts or spiritual spells. These people were indispensable to Dayu, but they were also extremely fragile. In order to take over the territory of Yanhuang that Wuqi had been managing for a long time, the 6 Saint Emperors had brought hundreds of thousands of purely civil officials. The vast East Sea included tens of thousands of provinces, countless counties, countless people, innumerable products, and innumerable treasures. How could they not have enough civil officials to take over such a huge amount of wealth? Suddenly, the guards of these civil officials pulled out their weapons and attacked them viciously. Clad in heavy armor, these guards of Diyu shouted in unison, "By the order of the Emperor of Yanhuang, we will kill you all." Then they swung their knives at top speed, and heads rolled and blood fell like rain. These civil officials, who had the strength to truss a chicken, did not even have time to howl before they were chopped in half like vegetables. Pangu continent was rich in natural energy, and the humans who grew up here were born with fleshly bodies that were at least 10 times stronger than those in outer heavenly realms. Therefore, although these civil officials had the strength to truss a chicken, that was all. In the face of the guards and generals whose cultivation bases were generally above second Pangu heaven, these civil officials were as fragile as tofu. Dozens of heads rolled with each slash, and before Yandan and the others could react, more than 80% of the civil officials they had brought with them were killed. There were also hundreds of thousands of soldiers of Diyu. At this moment, 30% of them raised their bloody knives and shouted, "By the order of Wuqi, we will kill the impostor of the Saint Emperor of the human race." Then they began to hack and kill their colleagues. The troops brought by Yandan and the others were in chaos. Wuqi was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled and snapped, "All soldiers of the East Sea, fall into formation. Do not move. Those who move will be regarded as collaborating with the enemy, and will be executed along with their families." Unlike Diyu, all the soldiers of the East Sea were die-hard loyalists who had been brainwashed by Wuqi over the years, and their souls had been secretly controlled by Wuqi. Therefore, the army of the East Sea was as solid as a piece of iron. When Ji Dai attacked Wuqi, there were some generals in the East Sea army who were ready to make a move. But at Wuqi's order, all the soldiers of the East Sea army steadied their positions. They stationed themselves in all directions and sealed off the ground and the sky, forbidding anyone from moving. Spears, iron shields, crossbows, and all sorts of other sharp weapons stood up like a forest of hemp. The East Sea metropolis was completely sealed off from the outside world. Crossing his arms over his chest, Wuqi calmly watched the troops brought by Yandan and the others fall into chaos. He smiled but did not offer a helping hand. Instead, he sighed and shook his head. He wondered if the mastermind behind this was the Taoist League or the Buddhist League, for they were trying to sow discord. Laughing in a low voice, Wuqi stamped his foot on Ji Dai, who was struggling uncontrollably. "Stay where you are," he said with a cold grin. "If you dare to move, I'll chop you into pieces." Ji Dai howled and coughed up mouthfuls of blood. Yandan's troops were in chaos. The soldiers were fighting fiercely, and no one could tell who was loyal and who was disloyal. All of a sudden, a Buddhist chant was heard, and the hundreds of generals who were wielding their blades suddenly leaped up to 30 feet in height. Their bodies shone with a golden light, and were adorned with jewels and pearls, revealing the golden bodies of the Buddhist League. Yandan's face turned pale with anger. Staring at Wuqi, he said in a deep voice, "Wuqi, this is the work of the Buddhist League's despicable people." Before his voice could fade away, streams of green and white smoke rose from the heads of hundreds of generals, in which a lotus the size of a human head was hovering. Thunderbolts shot out of their palms and raging fire from their mouths, and all kinds of Taoist magic were cast. Yandan shut his mouth. He was so angry that his body was trembling. Who was behind this? Chapter 1029. A golden light screen, hundreds of miles tall and tens of thousands of miles wide, stood between heaven and earth. The soldiers of the East Sea who were willing to leave with Wuqi dragged their families and slowly walked into the light screen. Those soldiers rode on heavenly dragons or other immortal beasts and flew in the sky, while their close relatives and friends walked on the ground. The stream of people disappeared into the golden light. The sound of hooves, wheels, and dust rose into the sky. The 6 saint emperors, including Yen Dan, stood on the East Sea city wall with their entourage, which had shrunk to nearly half its original size, silently watching the army of Wuxia leave. Less than half a day ago, the entourage of Yen Dan and his companions suddenly broke out in a riot. A large number of generals and soldiers who had cultivated the profound cultivation methods of Buddhism and Taoism rose up and started killing people. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of thousands of people in the entourage of nearly 1 million were killed. Yen Dan and the other 5 saint emperors personally suppressed the riot and captured all the rioters with overwhelming power. However, before they could interrogate these people about their origins, they all committed suicide with secret arts, leaving only half of the entourage alive. Now, except for Ji Dai, who was captured alive by Wu Qi, no one else was left alive. Now, Bai Qi had brought a group of villains to interrogate Ji Dai, asking him who was the one who set up this damn trap. Without a doubt, this trap had trapped Wu Qi, Yen Dan, and the other saint emperors. Although it did not work out, there must be some discomfort between the two sides, which was exactly what the mastermind wanted. This discomfort had also led to the East Sea army loyal to Wu Qi to let him take all of them away. Yen Dan and the other saint emperors could not bear to have an army that was completely out of their control. What had just happened proved how annoying it was to have an armed force whose loyalty was questionable. In just a few breaths of time, the riot had caused great losses. Would it happen again? Standing on the hologram, Wu Qi smiled and waved at Yen Dan and the others. The golden light curtain was the gateway to his small world. The huge East Sea Legion would be useful in the future. Who knew when it would be a surprise troop? A trace of Ren Huangqi was slowly being generated in his body. The Yen Huang kingdom in the East Sea had indeed been handed over to Yen Dan and the others, but the Yen Huang kingdom in the small world still existed. The Ren Huangqi had all kinds of magical effects. How could Wu Qi turn a blind eye to it? After 3 days and 3 nights, the huge East Sea Legion and their clansmen were all moved into Wu Qi's small world. Wu Qi took a glance at the East Sea city and the East Sea, which had now calmed down. He cupped his hands towards Yen Dan and the others, then turned around and flew away without saying a word. Not long after Wu Qi left, King Yangshan came to the East Sea with a large number of soldiers as reinforcements. When he learned from Yen Dan what had happened a few days ago, he immediately apologized to Yen Dan. After all, Ji Dai was his son, and no matter what Ji Dai had done, he could not avoid being blamed. After Yen Dan's gentle words of comfort, King Yangshan's tone changed, and he asked cautiously, "Your Majesty, is it true that this has nothing to do with the King of East Sea?" Yen Dan's face fell as well. "Are you questioning the Holy Mother?" he snapped. King Yangshan was so frightened that he hurriedly bowed and apologized, but he still did not give up and asked, "But, who is the King of East Sea? Could it be that he—" Yingzheng glanced at King Yangshan, then suddenly snorted coldly. King Yangshan dared not speak again. Compared with Yen Dan, who was kind and gentle, Yingzheng, who was brutal and violent, was the most awe-inspiring of the 6 sacred emperors. In ancient times, the name of Emperor Xuanxi was associated with blood, slaughter, and war. Of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, he was the most feared. After frightening King Yangshan, Yingzheng said slowly, "In any case, the East Sea is back into Yu's hands, and that's the best outcome. Before dealing with the various means of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League, you can't afford to make any more enemies. King Yangshan, go and question your son yourself, and find out who he is working for. The Buddhist League? The Tao League? If you can't find anything, you don't have to come to us." King Yangshan's face fell. He bowed respectfully to the 6 sacred emperors, then hurried to the prison where Ji Dai was being tortured with a group of his subordinates. Yingzheng glanced at King Yangshan's back, and a grim smile suddenly came over his face. Wu Qi no longer paid any attention to anything happening in the East Sea. He flew alone in the void, and gradually, he turned into a cloud and blended into the boundless thick clouds in the sky. No one could find him anymore. In the chaotic heavenly secrets and Pangu continent, Wuxia had deliberately concealed his aura. Even the many almighty experts of the Tao-fusing realm could not find out where Wuxia had gone. In the thick clouds, Wuxia first contacted Princess Zhonglu with his divine sense, who was slaughtering fiend gods and collecting virtues in the outer heavenly realm, and told her what had happened these days. After that, he cut off all contact with the outside world, and sat cross-legged in the clouds like a clay statue motionless. During this period, fierce battles broke out not far from Wuxia, between fiend gods and immortals, and between fiend gods and DU soldiers. But he paid no attention to these things that had nothing to do with him, and just immersed himself in the depths of his body. In the capital of Great Wu, Wuqi's 18 blood-draining fiend gods had stealthily transformed into invisible beams of light, and come to Wuqi's side. With a twist of their bodies, they transformed into 18 huge blood beads and hovered in front of Wuqi. Over the years, Great Wu had fought countless battles, and the 18 blood-draining fiend gods had devoured the blood essence of countless living beings, including human warriors, human oracles, immortals from the Tao League, and arhats and bodhisattvas from the Buddhist League. As the fiend gods from the outer heavenly realms had invaded Pangu continent, these fiend gods had devoured the blood essence of countless foreign fiend gods. As a result, their cultivation bases had broken through to the realm of Tao breaking, and all of them had reached the peak of the second tier. After all, with Wuqi's true form, the realm of cultivation was not a bottleneck for these fiend gods to break through. As long as they absorbed enough blood essence and energy essence, they could improve their strength almost without limit. But now Wuqi wanted them for something else. With the 18 blood beads hovering in front of him, Wuqi slapped himself on the forehead, and the heaven-refining cauldron slowly flew up. The blood beads flew into the cauldron, and quickly fused into 2 huge blood balls. Narrowing his eyes, Wuqi endured the suffocating pain, and split 2 prime Yuanling clones from his divine soul, each accounting for about 20% of Wuqi's Yuanling. This was different from splitting the divine soul, which was only a short-term loss and could be recovered with some time. But Yuanling was the core of the divine soul, the most fundamental and important existence of a living being. Once it was injured, it was almost impossible to recover. If Wuqi did not have the scroll of stealing as his trump card, he would not have dared to split his prime Yuanling. The 2 prime Yuanling clones were injected into the 2 blood balls. Yuanling true flame blazed and burned the 2 huge blood balls, giving off an intoxicating aroma with a strong smell of blood. Wuqi was using the heaven-defying power of the heaven-refining cauldron to remove the impurities from the blood balls, leaving only the essence of life in them. After 49 days of refining, the 2 blood beads in the cauldron had turned into 2 strange liquid balls that had shrunk to half their size, emitting a purple mist and a golden gleam. Wuqi smiled faintly. With a shake of his body, the muscles on both his arms peeled off like clothes, then fused into the 2 balls of liquid. As he waved his arms, the muscles, meridians, and skin quickly regenerated, while the muscles that had fused into the liquid balls melted rapidly. The once clear and transparent liquid balls now had a solid texture. Carefully, he performed a few incantation gestures and injected them into the liquid balls. The 2 liquid balls spun rapidly, and gradually, 2 figures appeared in them. As Wuqi gave a clear cry, a great amount of Yuanling true flame rushed into the 2 liquid balls, and 2 figures finally took shape amidst a clear thunderclap. One of them was dressed in Taoist attire. He stood over 9 feet tall, with white hair and a ruddy complexion. He was shrouded in clear mist and shrouded in purple mist. His cultivation had reached the peak of Tao-breaking realm. There was a vague starlight swirling in the Taoist's eyes. He cupped his fist and bowed to Wuqi, then said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, I'm Reverend Shouzhua, the sect leader of Underhand Sect." Wuqi laughed and bowed back to the Taoist. You flatter me, you flatter me." The other figure was dressed like a monk. He stood over 12 feet tall and had a sturdy body, vaguely giving off the bearing of a dragon or tiger. His cultivation had also reached the peak of Tao-breaking realm. Purple golden light shone faintly from under his skin. This was a sign that the body-tempering cultivation method of Buddhism had reached its limit. The monk clasped his hands at Wuqi carelessly. Fellow Taoist, I am the abbot of the Chan Monastery of Great Naga, Master Dai. Greetings. Wuxia rolled his eyes and snorted coldly at the monk. Monks are putting their palms together in greeting. Master Dai laughed dryly. He hurriedly put his palms together and said solemnly, I am Dai. Greetings, Master. Wuxia glanced at Master Shojua, then at Master Dai. He smiled faintly. Good. Let's go our separate ways. Now that we've gone to the East Sea, the shackles, it's really relaxing. It's so satisfying to move around. We've already gained enough from the East Sea. We must be content. We can't be greedy. Master Shojua and Master Dai agreed and bowed to Wuxia. As a result, Wuxia gave Shojua the Grand Pure 1-star fixing tower. He refined with the White Lotus of Great Purity, and the laws of the star cores of 108,000 million elephants to Master Shojua. Then, he gave Master Dai the pious followers of Buddhism in his minor world, who had already given birth to trillions of believers. It only took Master Shojua 15 minutes to refine the Grand Pure 1-star fixing tower. Laughing aloud, he turned into a stream of light and sped towards the underhand sect's headquarters. Master Dai also spent another 15 minutes to refine the 3,000 Buddhist kingdoms in the palm, storing the countless believers Wuxia had given to him into the Buddhist kingdoms. Then he chanted Buddhist scriptures loudly, and turned into a gust of fragrant wind, rushing towards the Chan Monastery of Great Naga guarded by Beiji. Wuxia had given away 2 clones. He pondered for a moment, then slowly strode into the outer heavenly realm. He sat in the void openly, constantly killing demon gods and accumulating virtues. Apart from himself and a few of his trusted subordinates, no one knew that he had 2 clones, and that he cultivated in 2 branches of Buddhism and Taoism. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.